aggressively or send Dylan a chat, and we'll try to maybe move the mic around if we need to, if there's some specific questions. But the main agenda item tonight, is one that was generated from you guys at our last meeting, and that would be to talk about licensing. And so we'll get to that after we do some introductions, but we've got Emily Cooper is going to be giving a presentation via the Teams, and it's very, very informative. There's a lot of meat there to digest and stuff, but it's really informative on maybe painting a more clearer picture on what we see, at least by the numbers. What perception and reality are sometimes not quite match up, but perception often is reality. And there's a lot of interesting numbers here that'll show what we're seeing license-wise with non-residents versus residents. And some of it's, I think, what people would expect, and others, I was a little surprised to see some of it, but we'll dive into that. So what I would just like to do first off, real quick, we'll do our usual introductions. I see we got some folks scattered around the edges too. And then we'll dive into Commissioner Tabor's going to give a little bit of an update. And I don't know if Jody
try. I haven't seen him yet.
Loomis with the Parks Board is going to be on. And he can give a brief update as well. But I could see this licensing discussion going long, potentially. I mean, there's a lot of information. I imagine they'll incite some good discussion, hopefully. And after that is when whatever time we've got left, we can rattle around the round table, for anything specific. But I won't take up any more of that time, but maybe we'll just roll around here. Go ahead, Pat, and then we'll let everybody know.
Pat Tabor, Vice Chair, FWP.
Excuse me. There we go. Lee Anderson, and I'm the Regional Supervisor, FWP here in Kalispell.
I'm Molly Vanderborg. I'm chair, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Still chair. I'm Dylan Tavish, FWP Regional Communication and Education person.
Tucker Landerman, Kalispell, Montana, born and raised, hunt, fish, all that good stuff.
Angie Tennyson, Kalispell, Montana, CAC member.
Yeah, Pat Van Imeren, up in Whitefish.
Joe DeValle, Big Fork.
Corey Anderson, Columbia Falls.
Mark Christensen, Kalispell.
Jay Sheffield, Libby.
Let's go your way, Jim.
Jim Vashro here in Kalispell with Flathead Wildlife and the Montana Wildlife Federation.
I'm Jeff Lucas with the Montana Wildlife Federation.
I'm Ben Rossetto from Kalispell. Just an interested citizen. I was on the first CAC committee in the early 90s, before and during reintroduction, and I've been on some of the chronic wasting disease committee that came up with our plan of attack before the first case hit. We knew it was going to come, and we knew it was already here. And then I was on the Lion Committee, and 30-plus year hunter education, bow hunter instructor.
So you're slightly engaged.
Still.
We like that. Dave.
Dave Landstrom, Region 1 Parks and Outdoor Recreation.
Lindsay Minka, Region 1 admin.
Martha Brescia, the Regional Office Manager.
Jessica Center, taught hunter for 27 years. I figured this was interesting for our numbers for licensing when I got the email, and also Montana Forest.
Neil Anderson, Wildlife Ranger.
Wes Hodekoven, Dave Morgan Sergeant here in Kalispell.
All right, Dylan, you want to maybe call them out on
Yeah, so I'll go down. Emily, I see you next up on my list.
Maybe. There she is.
Can you hear me, Emily?
She's up.
I can. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, there we go. We're just into
Perfect. Hi, guys.
introductions.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Emily Cooper. I'm serving in two roles at the current time. I'm the Licensing Bureau Chief and also the Acting Division Administrator for operations and financial services. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Emily. Ian.
Yeah, Ian Wargo, Kalispell, just a CAC member.
Awesome. And Kate Heston.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Sometimes my microphone doesn't work on here. My name's Kate. I'm a journalist with the Daily Interlake. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kate. Kayla.
Hi, I'm Kayla in Thompson Falls. I'm the Recreation and Outreach Coordinator for Connexu Land Trust, and I serve Sanders County.
Thanks, Kayla. Shelly.
Shelly Cold Iron Whitefish. Good to see you guys.
Thanks, Shelly. Yeah, good to see you. And let's see, last but not least, Tom.
I'm here, down in St. Ignatius.
Thanks, Tom. And who's in this? Oh, we got Ian.
Did we miss anybody else? Going once.
Cool.
You good, Dylan?
Yep.
All right, great. So, yeah, without further ado, we'll have Commissioner Tabor give a brief update and kind of set the stage for anything he's got going.
Okay, so I think you guys know we're gearing up for our June commission meeting. I'm hoping that you're seeing now this rhythm that we've got in. I think it's pretty effective as a commissioner. It's been super helpful for us. So literally within, I think the longest we had to wait was 4 days after the end of one commission meeting before the website is populated with the agenda for the upcoming meeting, which is usually 2 months in advance. And what you'll find there is usually a cover sheet that describes what the topic is and what will likely be voted on. And then there might be some other additional information if there's data or something that the department's pulling together. And so that then forms the agenda, and then there'll be a series of calls for public, input. And roughly around 2 weeks prior is when you start to see the website populated with the motions. If it's likely that the department is just going to, or the commission is going to go with just the standard suggested motion from the department, you probably won't see a commissioner put that in ahead of time. It'll just be done at the meeting. But if there's going to be any amendments or any type of revision to what might be the department's suggestion, or in a lot of cases, like for instance with Lions, the department isn't making a specific recommendation, it's giving an array of choices. So in that case, it will be necessary for one of the commissioners to put forth a motion, and then that usually activates the type of comments that most people will want to make based on what motion might be on the table. So I think we're 5 meetings into this series, and I think we're really getting a good rhythm. I know that the commission from the very beginning, as well as the department, has been really committed to trying to maximize public participation and give people just about every opportunity possible to make sure their voices are heard. So you can do that by going through the website. You can do that by contacting commissioners directly. There's the comment period that's official. Now, and a lot of times, if it's the official comment period, the department will take those comments and synthesize them and then help the commission understand. On big topics, it's not inconceivable that we'll have thousands of comments. So then it's very helpful to the commission to say there was 487 people that felt this way and 380, that type of thing. Because it does become a little overwhelming sometimes when you have lots and lots of comments, especially when the robots take over and your emails get filled and everything else. So this upcoming agenda, the two probably most significant things is there's a call for really looking at Lions statewide and taking the learnings and experiences and recommendations and first year experiences out of Region 1 and seeing whether that should maybe apply statewide. And so there's opportunities to step up, if you will, the aggression towards Lions to bring those numbers down as a result of a real direct concern about the health and welfare of our ungulated population. There's a lot of emotion around that. There was a lot of discussion during the legislation about it. So there's pretty high expectations that the commission really give that a lot of consideration. So we'll be wanting everybody's input on that. The other area that's probably in its third year now, so we're starting to get a little maturity to the program. The program, I don't even know its official name, I still know it by its nickname, which is the 454s. And these are the arrangements where private landowners are making their property available for access for special permit holders. These are in very unique places like the breaks. And for that, then they get some tags and options for themselves so that they can hunt either for themselves, their families, or their staff. And so this has created some access opportunities that heretofore were really hard to accomplish. So last year, I think it was 30 something that we had. And each year, you know, I think the department is meaningfully reaching out to areas where there's really a lack of access and trying to, you know, reach those landowners and say, this could be a really neat way for you to participate and then also get something in return. So we'll be talking about several of those, and sometimes we'll hear individual comments about a particular holder, but they're all pretty much standard. They all have the same, because they're supposed to comply with what is the legislative intent with regards to the trade-offs and the numbers. The commission asked the department, and the department, I think, has done a really good job of being good about reporting the after effect. Ooh, somebody, are you okay? I don't know that the camera will picture somebody laying on the floor or not, but so, you know, I think if your comments on any particular landowner or something like that, you know, if it's educated from the standpoint that, hey, you know, that person's acting in bad faith or whatever, but most of the time it's like, what's in it for the public? Well, trying to gain access to areas where, you know, you ordinarily could. And I think those, you know, we'll be doing some more land approvals and some grazing lease stuff, but those are probably the two most meaty items coming up. We're going to have a super busy schedule from that point on. We're rolling from August to October, and then into December, and then into February, because this is the cycle now that we go into for the season setting of biennials. And we have no less than, I think, Dylan, it's 4 plans that will all get finalized.
Wolf, elk, grizzly bears, mule deer,
Fish.
fisheries management plan.
Mule deer probably won't be completed.
Mule deer initiative, I guess, which is.
Yeah, mule deer probably won't be a 23 action. Fish, wolf, and elk are probably the heaviest focus. And we've delayed some decisions on some of the fisheries promulgations, in particular when it comes to allocative issues, primarily because we want that fishing management plan to speak to the value system and some of the other parameters that we want to establish, so that we have guidance and direction as commissioners as to what we're trying to apply, you know, as policy. The elk plan, which I know Ian worked very hard on a working group, and others of you have inputted, it's a very hot topic. It's near and dear to everybody's hearts. So we're all anxiously awaiting, you know, a draft, if you will, from, and then there'll be a comment period so we can perfect that. If all works well, we'll have a robust, agreed upon, very well publicly vetted elk plan that will proceed going into this, you know, the season setting, so that you should see very strict compliance with the elk management plan and the recommendations coming out of the department. I know that the commission has, you know, slammed their fist on the table about that. It's like there needs to be connectivity between the two. So it'll be busy, and again, open invitation, especially on the most upcoming topics. I do really want to hear about your experiences with lions, good, bad, or indifferent. The region, I think, did a phenomenal job in their first year of this new system. We got a lot of participation statewide, more so than ever, and that's a good, healthy thing. But it's not perfect like any system. And I know we're concerned statewide that we're not getting to those quotas. And so I know some of the other regions are saying, do we have to rethink that? Or is there an opportunity for somebody maybe to harvest a second lion? Or, because if we are going to try to get more aggressive about lions and we haven't even filled the quotas we have now, how do we get that done? How do we get more people participating? And if there aren't more people that are out there, then how do we give more opportunity to people that want to do it? So, stand ready to answer any questions, or can wait till after the presentation. But
Hey, Pat, one thing I was gonna piggyback off of, the importance of this mountain lion season setting process and what the department put out there. It got pretty hot and heavy at the legislature, and there was some LC there that essentially would have taken management authority away from the department and the Commission on Lions by making them a predator. And so they heard a lot of comment from the public about wanting to try to reduce mountain lions. The commission has heard it, the department's heard it. And so we put forward essentially 4 proposals. There's a status quo, there's a 10% reduction, a 20% reduction, and a 40% reduction option. We didn't weigh in on one at all. It'll be a commission decision, but laid those options out there to really look at it. We've already moved to with our eco region that has a few districts in region 2, had already moved forward with a goal of a 12.5% reduction over 6 years in our eco region. And I think that's what Pat was referring to. It's year 1, and we had a really good harvest. It was one of the highest harvests in 20 years for mountain lions. But we learned some things, and maybe there will be some tweaks and stuff, but the comment period will dictate some of that to come. But it's really an important thing that everybody's been hearing a lot of the voices that think we got too many lions out there. So.
And one really important factor to understand is when the department makes, like, for instance, those 4 recommendations, it does not put forth a recommendation that would be biologically irresponsible. So even the 40%, which sounds pretty drastic, to say that you're going to bring down a population by 40% over a 6-year period, that sounds pretty intense. They would not have said that's a viable option if they didn't believe that the long-term sustainability of the population is still achievable, even if you work to reduce it by 40% over 6 years. So what it really comes down to, and I think this is the part I know as a commissioner, I'm really trying to understand is, some of you are very passionate about your ungulates, rightfully so, because so am I, and you believe there's a cause and effect. And of course, there's obviously lots of other factors, other predators, habitat, all the different things we know affect the livelihood. But we need to hear from you what you really think is going to get done. And in Region 1 in particular, we went straight off the recommendations of that working group. And I would say that of all the choices they had, they went relatively on the conservative side in terms of population. And that was based on the mixture of the committee and the people who were there. And because we wanted a place to start, we just kind of ran with it. But if others in the region feel it needs to be higher, or if it needs to even be lower, you got to let us know so we get some indication of, what people are thinking and feeling out there. That kind of input's massively important for me as a decision maker. So.
Jay?
I said, excuse me, on those 454 permits that allocate some permit tags to the landowners for allowing permission, are those just own use where there's just owner, family, or employees? Those are not something they can sell or barter. It's just personal use.
That's correct.
Right. That's what I
yeah.
thought.
So there's really strict limitations to what they get out of the bargain, and there's
I
also
thought that's what it was. I just want to be sure.
And then there's a ratio that for what they get as a privilege, the public gets and then some. So I think it's a 3-to-1 type of scenario. So. The idea is this is a remarkable privilege because it's going outside the structure of permits and everything else. So therefore, we want to make sure
it's a good thing.
That something comes back to the public for this, and again, it's a attempt maybe not the best tool in the toolkit, but there are these little things that everybody's trying to do to improve access overall. Because there isn't one bill we can pass and so all of a sudden you get to hunt anywhere in Montana. We're gonna have to chip away at this every way we can, you know? And every idea is a good idea until we can figure out how it's a bad idea. You know, it's kind of the way we're looking at it, so.
And I don't think we've had anybody that's participating in that didn't go, I mean, they met it, but I think almost, I want to say 100% actually allowed more access than they were required to, whether it's in the form of additional bee harvest, that kind of stuff. So it was, they were meeting the statutory requirements of the license, and then there was increased opportunity above that.
So that's a good
There
thing.
wasn't anybody that
Yeah,
didn't go
30 of
above
the
it.
34, it says.
What's that?
30 of the 34 provided additional access to their access.
And the other question I had was, because the public comment thing, you know, when you got wolf regulation, you know, those got to go into the tens of thousands, I'm sure. When you go in there to comment, is there a way that kind of filters the people from Australia and Great Britain, and a way to identify, these are people that live in Montana, these are people that hunt in Montana? That, I mean, do you guys have any mechanism for doing that? I mean, are they IDing, or, I mean, I'm just kind of curious, because a lot of these are just purely one single agenda, and they're half of them are probably bots or, you know, whatever, but I'm just wondering how we kind of filter through that to go, well, there's 10,000 comments, but, you know, 1,400 of them are from Region 1 talking about the lions or wolves we know about, and the rest of them are from who knows where on the planet.
Yeah. Well, I know, so interestingly
Because
enough.
how do you weigh that?
On the last wolf scenario, they crashed the system.
Right.
Just like from time to time it happens on licensing when you get an overwhelming response. And so I know the department has worked very hard, and especially at the synthesizing level, to help differentiate, because I gotta tell you as a commissioner, if I see a letter with the same exact subject line, I read that once and then I never read it again. I don't care who it's from, where it comes from, or anything else, because it's irrelevant to me. I know what it says because it was written by probably one of the organizations those people are members for. They were coached by their organization to do it. And it has little meaning. It has little effect on our decision making. What really matters is you talking to me and saying, you know, my observation, what affects me, what I feel, because that matters to me. And I love the fact that there's organizations that say, hey, we got to rally because this affects all of us, because there are some people that are too busy working and they rely on their organizations to keep them apprised of things that are going to affect their daily lives. But personalizing things is the way to go, you know. So my coaching would be, don't use the bullet points they ask, and don't use the subject line, and you're more likely to be heard and read. The minute you use the standard subject line, delete. It's just because you don't have enough time to synthesize it. And if you're super passionate about it, and Dylan and I were talking about this before, you know, I get it from the inbox of the commission. I get it personal emails. I get it on my cell phone for the commission. We get it sometimes as group letters from NGOs that do really good jobs of having well-articulated letters with good research and everything. These two guys, you know, represent organizations that do that all the time. That all gets very well consumed. So like when I think of MWA or any of the NGOs here, they're encouraging their members to contact us. They, on behalf of their membership, are writing a well-written letter with information in it. People are calling us, you know, directly and saying, hey, this is why we feel important this way. And then they're testifying. And so there's many ways to participate, which is the way we want it. We don't want anybody to feel like, oh, they cram that sucker down our throat, because there is none of that really that's going on. There's no desire to do that.
To piggyback on that, I've asked this before, but I'm curious if we've gotten to that point yet. Are you outsourcing any of that synthesis?
I'd have to defer to, well, Emily, because that's going to be part of her area if she does it. But I know there's been really good improvements on the whole administrative process. They just hired a executive assistant to the commission, and this guy is as good as anybody I've ever come across in 45 years of business and everything else. He is on it. And I think he's gonna help the ability of the public to communicate with the commission to do their jobs, get the information much, much better. But that information and the synthesization of it, I don't know, Neil, does it fall on wildlife people or does it fall on the individual proposers or who in the system?
There's a lot of folks in town that administrative and stuff that do that.
Okay.
We do some at the regional level as well.
Because it reaches
I
a
don't think
point
there's
when
an
you're saying
automated
you
way
can't
of
just
doing
do it. Yeah, well, yeah, my experience at the federal level is like there are some topics where the government is contracting it out because it's too much. And there is ways nowadays with technology that it's being approached with more of an AI synthesis or something. So we're not relying just on humans saying, oh, I feel like reading that one. No, I don't feel like reading that one. No, I've seen that subject line before, but it's actually a little more scientific with computer-aided technology. But I know that costs money. And that's why I keep asking that question, because when you're getting 10,000 comments from Australia on wolves, like, we cannot expect our public servants to be stopping everything they're doing and paying due diligence to those.
Any other commission stuff before we?
I have a commission question for you. Although it's not in your region, and it's kind of really changing gears, but when you were talking about the Lion Plan and having goals that are set, harvest 10%, 20%, 40%. The thing about the bison harvest out of Yellowstone Park, so there was an agreement last October to harvest no more than 14% between Montana, Yellowstone Park Superintendent, the tribes. And if I'm right, so far the harvest is probably closer to 30% this year. Do you see the commission being involved with that issue? I mean, what have you been hearing as far as bison come out of the park this winter? What's going to change? What's on the forefront come up this summer? Because, I mean, the harvest was extraordinarily high to the point where I know the Forest Service, the Park Service went out there, pulled in big old trailers and picked up carcasses and gut piles and everything else and hauled them off to the dump to keep the bears off them. I mean, you have to be hearing about that stuff. What do you think is going to happen?
So like any condition, that one's a pretty sensitive one because of the whole park and tribal element to it. It's a whole different dynamic, just like HD 313s and the wolves in Yellowstone. So it's almost like that's its own world down there in terms of how we're regulating and trying to cope with the complexities. But in a general sense, whenever we hear about, because this winter was pretty tough, right? So we fully expect that there will be some mid-year adjustments. Now, we're going into biennial, so it's kind of a moot point because we're going to reset everything. So that one, along with everything else, will be revisited. If anything were to occur prior to the biennials being set, because the season's going to be open before we set a new quota, and if there's a concern, that's going to get put on the agenda by the department, and we're going to make sure we hear about it. And it will be initiated by the regions, the biologists that have, purview over that, and they'll say, we got to do something now. We can't wait till the next cycle and everything else. So I've heard a lot about it. I've heard a lot of noise. I haven't seen anything official come from the department, but the process will always remain the same, and that is we count on the professionals in the department to initiate. Things aren't typically initiated by the commission unless we don't see that the department, it's even on their radar. That just hasn't been the case. So the department, when I talked to the deputy director last night about this and looking forward, and it's like, we kind of know there's a rhythm to commission meetings. We kind of know what June tends to be and August tends to be. You can predict that. Like every August, we're going to be talking about wolves. Every June, we're going to be doing season setting for lions. And so there's a rhythm that we know in advance, and then we backfill all the other specialty things, like where we have to approve land acquisitions, we have to approve easements, we have to approve grazing leases, all sorts of those things that are all part of our purview as well. And then the big meaty items like season setting and promulgation reviews, fishing plan, all that stuff, they come usually in 2-year cycles. We're going to put fishing on a 2-year cycle like hunting. Because it used to be annual. It's kind of like, why do that? That seems like a lot of extra work. So we want to really get a rhythm and a calendar pushed out so people see some predictability of when these decisions are made. But that doesn't take away the emergency management tools that are available both to the department and the commission. I had, the deputy tell me just last night is sometimes people think that we won't ever meet on something That's not true. If there's an emergency, and we've done this twice now since I've been on the commission, we can hold a meeting, we can public notice, and we can address that issue right then, right literally within a week or two if we have to take action fast. And we have done that on a couple of occasions.
I think one thing on the bison thing, Pat, that a lot of people don't realize is we have 80 licenses for the state.
Yeah, I think there's 75 that were harvested by the hunters.
And so that's hunters that are doing that. The rest would be, treaty hunting, I would assume.
But that's what my question, I guess, would follow up would be is, do you see Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks or the Fish and Game Commission taking a leadership role in terms of trying to facilitate a discussion between the Department of Livestock, not as much as merely the tribes, because it's the tribes that have to have some self-regulation amongst themselves. But who's going to facilitate that discussion amongst the tribes? Does the state take the lead in that to make that happen? Because I don't see the tribes doing that themselves.
That probably gets up into the governor's office at that point.
You're close, Pat. You're close.
I know where it's located.
But it's just that they have to self-regulate themselves, and it just doesn't happen, And I was just in Cut Bank 2 days ago, and there's a bison head in the back of a pickup truck in Cut Bank. That's a guy else with a license plate. And I'm sure they're a tribal member that are just living out of country, but still, you're kind of like, all right. I'm sure they're a tribal member, but you're still seeing bison that are being shipped up to Alberta.
I think CSKT is pretty active in their treaty hunt, and they
I think they're a leader in that role.
Law enforcement down there, they heavily regulate it, and they do a really good job of it. I can't speak to, I don't know all of the tribes that are involved now, but the number of tribes involved has exponentially grown.
26 claim treaty rights, and there's probably 6 to 8 that really participate in the harvest.
Yeah, so, but anyway, yep. Thanks, Pat.
Yep.
Anybody else for the commish? Did Jody join us at all by chance?
Yeah, we're all, Ian, go ahead, Ian.
Oh, okay.
I guess I was just kind of curious with all, we've got, elk management plan out there. We got lions, we got, work taking place on mule deer management. I was just kind of curious, like it's been, something that I've kind of been vocal about a little bit, but just, I don't know if this would come from the department more or a request from the commission, but I kind of feel like, maybe there needs to be just one step higher look at everything, just kind of like an overall. Has there ever been any discussion about an overall management plan in Montana where we kind of look at like, something to go back to, I guess, as we, kind of keep a running tally. If we pull a lever on, reducing cow elk or lion populations or whatever, to see, to try a little bit better categorize over time, how, when we do decide to pull a lever, what are the long-term impacts of that, instead of the, kind of just focusing in on, putting our blinders in on this. We're going to talk about this species today and pretend everything else doesn't exist. And I'm definitely oversimplifying that, but I'm just kind of curious if there's been much discussion from that approach.
Well, I can answer from a commission perspective, and then Lee or Neil or somebody can answer for the department. There has been a call to action. Again, a lot of us have started benchmarking off of other systems in other states and looking how overall policy set, overall wildlife and fisheries management is set, and then the interrelationship between all of them and the correlation. So, when you think, it's kind of interesting, we don't really actually have an overall predator policy per se. We have piecemeal. I think that's what you're speaking to, Ian, is we have piecemeal this, that, and everything else. It's so complicated because I remember when I first became a commissioner, I asked what I thought was something really simple. I just wanted to know the correlative effect of predators on ungulates in Region 1, and I think everybody looked at me like, yeah, so that doesn't happen, that doesn't exist. It's too complicated because all the variables in and out, so rise in lions is a decrease in wolves and all that, so every time you push one thing, it's like pushing on a balloon and something pops up out somewhere else. And so it would be lovely, and who knows, maybe in the advent of AI, we will be able to gather data in such a meaningful and correlative way, we'll be able to figure it out. So I think so far, what I've heard, the direction of the department is going to be very focused on what are some key objectives that we want to accomplish, let's say over the next 6 months, and be real deliberate about hitting those objectives and doing a really good job on them. And those should be the ones that are, pretty critical, mission critical right now. Despite the fact that there's a phenomenal set of staff and everything else, there's just so much time and just very limited everything, right? So you have to pick and choose what you can be effective at. And I think what you will see is some very deliberate intention on really crossing some of the bigger things off the list, and in an order that really is sensible with regards to what really matters right now to the state, and just keep after it. But I don't think there's any comprehensive interrelating, correlative type of plan that integrates predators, predator management, ungulate management, and all those things. Maybe philosophically.
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, that's kind of our job, and you try to put all that into a plan. You take what's like the elk plan, for instance, it's already going to be a fairly complicated long plan, and you make it exponentially bigger. But that doesn't mean you can't make decisions like the commission's waiting now on, do we pull a lever? And I think that is a challenge on us as biologists then to try to evaluate, can you pull that lever, what's the impact? And so I think either it's in there, is it a comprehensive plan that somebody can pick up and see, hey, do this, and we expect to see that? Probably not to that extent, but it's part of the science of wildlife management. Trying to evaluate those triggers, whether it's hunting seasons or predation or habitat. What are those effects when we make a change? What happens?
Okay, I appreciate that. I think, yeah, I mean, and obviously all the work that's gone into the mountain lion stuff, taking a harder look at that, that's appreciated. Also, I'm just, kind of throwing it out there for more of I would suspect the department's going to see, you're going to see a lot of comments on lions and whatnot, maybe not quite as many as wolves or whatever, but, trying to, throw out there maybe just a little bit better justification for, deciding to pull a lever potentially to reduce lion populations that, hey, take the Bob Marshall, for example, we got looks like you guys just did your flights, and we're approaching 100-year low on our elk populations or something. That might be valuable information for the public to hear about, and maybe take a little bit of pressure off the department for maybe making a decision that how some of them link together. But just thought, comment. So appreciate the input there.
Thanks, Ian. Anybody else? All right, Dylan, you want to?
Yeah, I think if we don't have any other questions for Commissioner Tabor, Jody, do you mind introducing yourself and any update for the group? Here's your chance.
You got me all right now?
Yeah, got you loud and clear.
Oh, thanks. I'm sorry I was late to the meeting. I was trying to get the electronic computer glitch figured out, and I'm not very technical savvy, so that was me that sounded like I hit the floor, but I'm okay now. So I apologize for the interruption. My name is Jody Loomis. I'm the Parks and Outdoor Recreation board member for District 1, which would be Region 1 and Region 2. Probably just a couple of things to just give you guys a little bit is we got a board meeting coming up on June 12th, and a couple of the items that we're looking at is one is we're looking to consolidate the rules that we have through our that guide our state parks, fishing access sites, and our wildlife management areas. Right now, we've got 3 different sets of rules. So we're looking at simplifying these or consolidating them. So we've got one set of rules that work over all 3 of these different site areas. So so that's good. That we're just looking at on the 12th is probably just kind of taking the first step. It's going to be, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a long process, but we're going to kind of take the first initiative step down that road. And then also in the June 12th meeting, as we're looking at Parks has another $2 million to spend on Summers Beach, which is our newest state park. And that so that fund so we'll before the board we're going to vote on that $2 million to be allocated to some improvements on Summers Beach. So there's a lot of planning that's gone into this. There's some great improvements that we're looking at doing to Summers Beach. If you haven't taken a look at what goes into managing and planning and improving only 103 acres of state park, you should take a look at that Summers Beach project that is on the FWP's website. That planning project that Dave Landstrom and his crews put together is just fantastic. There's a ton of information on there, maps, public comments, broken down, all the different ideas that have been proposed and some withdrawn, and Dave's just done an awesome job. So I'd encourage anybody that's interested there on your advisory committee board to take a look at that. It's pretty exciting. So I think the ideas are just great. It's going to just be a nice addition to recreation around Flathead. So anyway, if anybody's got any questions, of course, Dave Landstrom is really the man in the know on this, but I'd be welcome to entertain anything. So Dylan, you're looking around. Is he in the room?
He was just here, but I don't know if he ran to the bathroom or what.
He had to run home for a family emergency, so he won't be here. But
Well, that's
He heard Summers Beach mentioned and ran.
Yeah.
It's been a great project for him.
I can offer a little bit because I've heard Dave's speech a number of times, and I know the effort that he has put in it. But you hear $2 million, and it's amazing how little you get for $2 million. But the biggest project that's going to be going down there, if the Parks Board, authorizes the funding, would be more work on the dynamic beach. There's a big chunk of the beach that needs to still be overhauled to help, reduce erosion and really protect that area along the North Shore. But there would be potentially, if it's, the money's there, paving of the parking lot. We're looking at having a camp host there. And there still isn't enough money to do everything. And so some other things may not actually happen. We were going to put in a fee station. We did neck back on lodging as a proposal. We heard a lot from the public on that, of maintaining a day use. But, there's 103 acres there. There's a big flat hay field that, you could really stack RVs in there if you wanted to. And we heard loud and clear that's not what the vast majority of the public wanted. They wanted to keep it pretty low key and rustic. So that didn't make it into the initial proposal. And then we further took out of the decision notice to any of the tent camping sites that we had, and we left it to three rental cabins on the far west side, rustic, small. They don't have running water. It'd be a vault toilet. I think they have electricity, but just three. So that's the only overnight lodging that's going to be put in there that we requested to have in the decision notice. And so really limited. It's about day use, but there's some of those improvements. And the money goes quick, when you're paving things. And then there would be a camp host pad there for 2 camp hosts, so that we had 7-day-a-week coverage, and toilets as well. And it's just a really exciting time for that. But other things that we have going in Parks and Outdoor Rec, we've got our Big Arm Archery range is under construction and moving. You can see where they're doing the big dirt right at the main parking area. And you can see the trail starting to head up into the trees. Kokanee Bend, we're going to do some stuff with some regional funding there to do a few upgrades. Bird and Cedar Island out on Flathead Lake. We've got The composting toilets are gonna be going in on those islands, and then we're working, I can't remember if it's MCC that's doing the designated campsites on those islands, that's happening. Montebello, final designs are almost finished. I don't wanna jinx it, and hopefully we're gonna be moving dirt here this year on Montebello, which is straight across from Skiko Bay. Be a year-round boat access. I think there's a number of boat trailer slips, but it'd be year-round, so we don't have a lot of those 12-month boat launches on the lake. So Summers Beach, Yellow Bay, we've got $1 million reroute of the road going in at Yellow Bay. Confluentus is an access site on the Thompson River, right at the mouth of the Thompson and the highway. That's gonna be under construction here. We just got approval from the commission on Lake 5 for a 4-acre donation to the department on the life estate when the passing of the resident is there. We would take those 4 acres on, but the best part about that, in my perspective, is we're not doing anything with it. No plans, no EAs, no nothing further. We're getting 4 acres that just adds to the site, increases the lake shore on the front, but we're not adding parking, boat trailers, nothing. It just gives the people more area to get away from the boat launch, and that's on a donation. So it could be this year, it could be 10 years. I don't know when it's gonna happen, but the commission authorized that. We just gotta close on the paperwork on it with the owner, which was Jim Ridenauer and that family that donated it. So lots of exciting access and development going on in Region 1. Tea Kettle, we're looking at some work there as well, as far as paving and some other options. So lots of stuff.
One I'd add is for anybody, a volunteer opportunity, Lone Pine State Park got, I can't remember if it was Commission or Parks Board approved expansion of Lone Pine by 9 acres, I think. And we're expanding the archery range up there. And on May 26th, Brian Schwartz and I, and maybe some master hunters, are gonna be up there putting all the archery targets in. So if anybody here is interested, I'll send that in a follow-up email. I'll buy you lunch.
What day of the week is that?
It's Friday, May 26th, we'll be up there, putting in all the targets in the existing frames, and then we gotta put the frames into the new expanded targets. I think we're adding on those 9 acres another 10 targets, something like that. So that's gonna be just a really cool, it's already a very cool archery range, but now it's about to get bigger and better. So I'll send some emails out, and anybody who's interested that day, hopefully it'll be good weather, and buy Jimmy John's.
And the commission also did authorize us to continue moving forward with Sportsman's Bridge as part of the realignment of the new bridge. So we're continuing on in that regard. So lots of cool stuff. It's amazing it all happening right now. Busy.
I have a question for Jody, and maybe for you too, Lee. You talked about the comments that came in on Summers Beach Park, and the public wants less development. And maybe Jody might be able to answer this. Is that the trend statewide? And when we look across the state in terms of when we have ability to provide more capacity, we are not doing that. I'm not saying whether that's good or bad, but is that a trend statewide in terms of comments that are coming across the state to have less development because of how special Montana is and we don't want it developed? I mean, what's your take on that, Jody?
Boy, I see comments kind of all across the spectrum. And some of the things I see that people are afraid if you do this, they're going to come. But in the really, this is a low development deal, and it's actually going to make things a little bit better as far as protecting things. I guess I would say just as far as Summers Beach goes, as far as the trend, I don't know. I don't really see a change in comments that I see. But and I was reading the comments today, so that's kind of in my mind. I was reading through all the comments today on Summers Beach, and really, I think what a lot of people miss is that right now it's just kind of a free-for-all. There's no. This is going to add a lot of organization to it. It's going to add a lot of beauty to it. We're preserving the beach. And at the same time, we're going to be able to accommodate more people. So it's really a win-win. Once you actually get into the discussion with people and talk about the pluses of it, I think then they kind of open their eyes to, yeah, this makes sense. So, just trash and that type of things that just help us protect the place. And like Dylan, oh, actually, no, I don't know if that's Dylan, but anyway, talked about there was a little bit left over from the end there that when they worked on the dynamic beach, some things that just didn't quite get finished up. They had a lot of the dynamic part done, but a lot of the actual type of gravel that makes for a nice beach, very little of that got done. And so this time around, it's going to be finished off. So, I mean, it's just going to make it so much nicer for people to walk on the beach and kids to play. And so it's just going to be really a win-win all the way around, I think. So.
I think to add to that, Pat, I think a lot of times it's site specific.
Yeah.
And in this case, this was a unique property and a unique setting, and that was where the focus lended itself to. But I think there's other places where people are willing and want to see the capacity. And we know there's a need for it up here. We have 161 campsites on Flathead Lake. That's it. And so there's a need, but you got to find that right spot where it's going to be tolerated and where you can pull it off. And I think the public spoke up pretty loud and clear on what needs to go in that one. But that's not to mean there aren't other places. But I've heard that sentiment out there that they'd rather have it just chuck full and don't build any more, to make it potentially worse. But we also hear this desire, we need to build some capacity. So we're trying to find that sweet spot. That one, what we recommended was a very, very limited opportunity of any type of diversified lodging. So.
Yeah, I think that was a good choice, Tom.
Kayla, do you mind chiming in? I see your chat here, but I'd be curious to get your perspective from Thompson Falls. Oops, sorry if I put you on the spot with the kids.
That's okay. I've done a couple of recreation surveys for projects I was working on here in Thompson Falls. And one of them is like a Forest Service site that hasn't been used in decades. It's just essentially been abandoned, and it's right close to town. And the idea was to offer a type of recreation opportunity that we aren't seeing elsewhere. And the focus was community, but the majority of the written comments that came in on that survey were kind of like what was mentioned, like we don't need more development, like just leave it alone, those kinds of things. Even though we were trying to provide something that's not already there. So yeah, I was just chiming in with my little anecdote from this little town that people, it definitely is throughout the state. Whether it's changed or is the same, I don't know, but it's definitely a common feeling.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Kayla. Any other questions for Jody?
I've got one question about fishing access site in front. Is there any status change on tax discussion about funding for those outside of?
Yes.
It was
approved, so.
There was
I wasn't sure if I dreamt that or.
Yeah, so there was a bill that passed in the session this year that did a number of things. It was part of a DNRC bill it actually made the recreational use rules on DNRC. Actually, it made it now to where wardens could actually issue a citation for those. In the past, it was just a civil notice that didn't have much teeth to it at all. And so it actually made those criminal where you could enforce those. And there were a number of other things in that bill, but the big one was it it finally got through where it would require anybody at a fishing access site to have a conservation license, actually on department lands. Parks is exempted because their money comes through the light vehicle tax. And so if you have that license plate, you're granted that, so it's not required there. But these non-angling folks, et cetera, that don't have a conservation license, you need to have that, and then you can go in that site. But on DNRC lands, what happened then is that if you have your conservation license before, it just covered hunting, fishing, and trapping. Now it covers anything. So just having that, you can do all the recreational use on there that may have in the past required you to get that subsequent rec use license. And so that's a big deal. It's going to be a workload issue for enforcement for sure. But we got what everybody's been asking for. We mean collectively the public and everybody to get some compensation from other folks than just the anglers that are out there funding at these sites or hunters or whomever. And so that passed. And one last thing along those lines before we jump into Emily's discussion. We talked about, the session just ended fairly abruptly. In case you didn't see that, that was interesting. And we were talking about it amongst the supervisors of trying to find a way to have a legislative update for all the CACs, and we kicked it around. And I think what we're going to shoot for is actually doing a statewide Zoom call where all the CACs across the state at the same time can listen in to a legislative update that the department's going to give. And I think that's a great idea. Then we don't have to have a subsequent meeting or take time off of another one. And we can get right from the folks that really were in the trenches. Emily will probably be able to touch on some legislative stuff with her presentation should a question come up, because she was down there on a number of license bills, non-resident type nut license bills, et cetera. So I think that's where we're going to move to. So stay tuned and be looking for that. And you'll see all the stuff that FWP had, because there was a fair number of them. But that one did pass, which was a big step.
Was it effective immediately, or what's the
July
1st?
1st.
July 1st?
July 1. Okay. So.
Cool, thanks.
Without further ado, maybe introduce our keynote speaker.
Yeah,
Dylan,
thank you,
and
Jody.
Thank you very much.
Emily, go ahead. I don't know if, Emily, you can try stop sharing your screen and reshare it, because it's hard to see for the, or maybe I just got to fiddle with something.
Okay, we'll try.
So yeah, now try resharing your screen again. Let's see how that.
Is that good?
It is good.
Suspense.
Excellent. That sounds like a green light to me.
Yes, green light. It's all yours.
Okay. Thank you guys for letting me participate. I've given this presentation just a bunch of times. I gave it to several our legislative committees in Senate Fish and Game and House Fish and Wildlife, and I gave it to the Sportsman's Caucus, and I gave it to anybody else that wanted to listen. So bear with me. I've given it a bunch of times. So some of you may have heard this before. What typically works the best that I have gone through so far is that I'll go through the presentation and questions afterwards. So I've numbered each one of these slides. So if you have a question, just make a note of the slide and we'll go back to it again. And I'm happy to answer any questions. But I think when I do it this way, I answer some of the questions that you have in mid-presentation with the next slide, perhaps. So I think, Dylan, you handed all those out?
I just handed them out.
Okay, so we are talking about hunting license trends in Montana. So we're going to start by adjusting license and permit numbers. We have a couple ways to manage populations. Our population goals include population size, age structure, male to female ratios. We have some of the tools to manage those goals, the number of hunters that are out on the landscape, method of harvest, season length and timing, bag limits, and access. So for population management, we have two different types of licenses, an A license or an antlered or either sex, primarily used to target antlered animals. These manage population age structures, male to female ratios. They don't significantly affect the population trajectory unless the population is way under objective. However, the B licenses manage population trends. That's what their main focus would be. So then we move to licensing overview here. So we're just going to start really high level at the basic stuff. A license provides a hunter an opportunity to harvest and possess the carcass of an animal. A permit is used in conjunction with that license, and it expands or restricts a license opportunity. You can have a license without a permit, but you may not have a permit without a license. It seems really elementary, but it's a super important step here that lots of people don't understand, judging from our interactions with the public at the call center and things like that. So there are a couple ways to do this for residents and non-residents. So this presentation, I'll tell you, is mostly specific to deer and elk licenses. For a resident, you have your A license, which is your general deer or general elk. And then we have our B licenses. Some deer B and elk B are limited by a quota, while others are available without a quota set on them. For non-residents, they're limited by statutory quotas and allocated through a drawing. Their B licenses are limited to a maximum of 10% of a drawing-based license quota, unless, if and only if, all the residents that applied received a license, and then they could get more than that 10%. So we will move to statutorily limited non-resident deer and elk licenses. You guys have all heard these things before. The big game and elk combination have a combined quota of 17,000. So two different types of licenses, but one quota. That deer combination license has a statutory quota of 4,600. Then there's the landowner sponsored deer combination, which is for non-resident hunters that are sponsored by resident landowners and valid only on that private landowner's property. Then there is the come home to hunt licenses. Those also are laid out in statute with a quota. Each of those combination licenses have a quota of 500 each. So 500 big game combos, 500 elk combos, and 500 deer combos. So non-resident combination license includes a general license, your season upland game bird, and your season fishing. So then we talk about non-resident deer combination licenses. So the base quota for a deer combination license is 4,600. That is set in statute. So this is going to where it gets a little bit complicated. So I will answer questions when we go back to this, because I kind of there's a flow here that I have to go through. So I apologize. During the drawing, deer licenses are added to the quota from different sources. So the landowner sponsored deer combination. So any unclaimed landowner sponsored deer licenses are also added to the base deer combination license quota. And in the next slide, I'll give you an example of what this looks like, okay? For elk combination licenses, each elk license combination holder and an unclaimed deer license is separated from that big game combo. So that 17,000, everybody who says I just want an elk, that separates that deer license, and that is also added to the deer combination license. We call it internally an orphan deer. It's separated out and created its own combo type. That is also in statute. So this particular presentation will show you some 2022 drawing information. We just did the 23 stuff, and I did not bring those numbers, so we're going to roll off last year's. So this is actual numbers from the 2022 non-resident combination license drawing. The quota of big game and elk combos was 17,000. When we shook up the bucket and we distributed all the licenses, all randomized, it came out like this. There were 12,617 big game combos issued, 4,383 elk combos issued, which orphaned the same number, the exact same number, 4,383 deer licenses. So there are 955 landowner sponsored deer combination licenses that we spoke about that are only valid on that private landowner's property. So that left 1,045 unclaimed landowner sponsored deer combination licenses because their quota is 2,000. So the beginning quota for last year when we did this combination license was the 4,600 base quota plus 1,045 unclaimed landowner-sponsored deer combos plus 4,383 orphan deer combos. So the beginning non-resident deer quota combination license was 10,028. That's how many were issued. So next we move to the 10%. We talk about the 90-10 split a lot. So 10% of license and permit quotas are limited to a maximum of 10%. Non-residents can get those. So here's a couple of examples that we'll just walk through really quickly to do some simple math to show you what instances these happen. So in this one, there's a quota on that particular license of 100. There's 150 people that apply for that. The split would be 120 residents and 30 non-residents. So if we look at the table below, only 100 available, 150 people applied. We can see that the quota limit was 90% and 10% split. So in this particular opportunity, more applicants than licenses available. That's where you're going to see the limit to the 10% non-residents. The next one is a quota of 50, and by miraculous magic, we have 50 applicants. So of those applicants, 30 residents and 20 non-residents. So in this particular example, if you look over to the column farthest to the right, you're going to see a 60-40 split. The non-residents got more than 10% because all the residents that applied got the license they applied for, leaving a remaining amount to be distributed to non-residents. So that particular statute was met. All those residents got one, and which included more for non-residents, the availability. The third example is a quota set at 150. There's less applicants than there are licenses available. So in this example, we have 80 residents and 20 non-residents. So everybody got a license. Also, there are 50 leftover licenses. So those licenses are what we call surplus. So we sell those over the counter or through the surplus sign-up list. And for that particular phase of license sales, that 90%, 10% split does not apply. It took into consideration the primary drawing when we distributed it to everybody that applied. We met the needs of that statute there. So in the secondary over-the-counter sales, it's not limited. It's open to anybody else who wants to purchase it. There are a couple other non-resident licenses that are out there too. So for deer and elk, there is what we call the native Montanan license, the college student licenses, youth licenses. Non-residents do not have quotas on upland game bird licenses, migratory bird licenses, or turkey. So they can buy however, there is no maximum statutory limit. Like we spoke about a couple slides ago, and we said there's 17,000, 4,600. Nothing exists like that for birds. There are 5 unlimited hunting districts for bighorn sheep, and then black bear, some mountain lion, and wolf are available over the counter and don't have statutory limits. These particular license types are available to applicants that meet those eligibility requirements. A couple things that we needed to consider here was statutory changes to licensing. This is I-161. That was when we eliminated the outfitter-sponsored license back in 2010. The outfitter-sponsored license was a variable price license, and it did have a restriction for non-resident license holders could only hunt on outfitter on lands that outfitter designated in their operations plan when they filed it with the Montana Board of Outfitters. Residents or non-resident combination licenses have no such restriction right now. They can choose wherever they want to hunt. Then the passage of House Bill 140, of course, from the 2015 legislative session, we talk about this quite a bit. It created that base hunting license that you have to have in order to purchase any sort of license that requires harvest. And it standardized all the license fees and discounts, and it reduced the number of free licenses that we offer. There are very, very few free licenses that we offer anymore, and those are, I think, specific to terminally ill folks. So to give you a little context here, resident versus non-resident licenses, the license package for a resident sportsman combination without bear is $62. That same license for a non-resident big game combination is $1,208. A resident beer, I keep saying that, so you know where my head is this evening, I guess. That resident
yet,
beer B
not
license is $10, while the non-resident's gonna pay 75. Elk B licenses, residents pay $20, and the non-residents are paying 270. So now we get into some pretty graphs here. So for the purpose of all of these graphs, residents are portrayed in blue and non-residents in orange. So we can kind of just look at overall revenue. This includes every license of every type. And by that, I mean fishing, bird, everything that gets everything. So we can see that non-residents bring in 76% of that revenue, while residents bring in 24. So if you talk to Commissioner Tabor or any other discussion about legislative stuff, they talk about this a lot. This is our revenue source. This is where the money that funds FWP comes from. It's largely from non-residents. So all of that legislation that we're going to talk about in later meetings, you know, this is always a question. If we reduce non-resident license sales, how do we make up for that revenue? So this just kind of gives you a visual. This is for all the license types. This next slide is just specific to deer and elk licenses. So just specific to these two license types, non-residents bring in 80% of that revenue, while residents at 20%. So we are going to talk about specifically license sales. So total license sales, we took a look at, 12 years worth of license sales. Since 2010 to 2022, resident license sales have increased substantially, 457,000, along with non-residents as well. So we've seen an overall increase in license sales over 1 million licenses. This is sales money, so $1 million increase. Sorry, this is a license sales, don't panic. This is revenue. So this is specific to Deer A licenses, so you're either sex. Once there's been an increase in those license sales from 2010 to 22, 7,000, overall increase of 9,870. So you can see the non-residents are pretty steady because they don't increase, that statutory cap, but the residents fluctuate a little bit. This is the same graph, only with elk licenses, so an overall increase in those sale numbers of 10,000. Same thing, non-residents have that statutory cap, so that's why that orange looks pretty solid across the board there. So these are other non-resident Deer A licenses increased from 2010 to 2022. So this is a couple slides ago when we talked about the non-resident native license and the come home to hunt license. So we've seen an increase in those from an overall increase of about 2,000 of those over the last 12 years. So people, are interested in those. You can see the peak of those was in 2015. And that is when House Bill 140 went into effect. So the year after that, you can see a decrease there because we standardized the price of those licenses. Non-resident elk licenses, this is the same information, those native licenses, come home to hunt licenses, college student licenses, an overall increase in those of 843 over the past 12 years. So B licenses here, we've seen an overall decrease in deer license sales. Sorry, guys. We're a decrease of 16,000 of those, and those would be, this depends on your season settings, and those years, I could probably look to Neil here to see back in 2014 there was probably a reduction in population for deer, which means the quotas went down, license sales went down, that kind of thing. So we can actually see that in our graphs here. Elk B license sales overall increase 9,000 over the last 12 years. So we're seeing a little bit more non-resident license increase, but a lot more residents. So more residents are purchasing more elk B licenses. This one, the legislative session saw quite a few comments and questions specific to upland game bird licenses. So I did throw this in there just so we can see This is specific to season upland game bird licenses. There is a significant increase in residents and then non-residents, as you can see. Overall increase in those of 38,000. So that one is worth noting just to kind of have an idea. So then we take a look at hunter numbers. So it's not just about license sales and about revenue. Now we want to look at what our hunters look like. So this is the total hunters. These are actual people, not licenses, not revenue. These are boots on the ground. So we've seen a decrease in residents between 2012 and 2022 of 13,000 and an increase of non-residents of 31,000. So this is for all license types across the board. This is not just specific to deer and elk. This would include the couple slides ago when we talked about the upland game bird license. We can see that there is an increase there. So this one is just specific to deer and elk hunters. We're seeing an increase in just resident deer and elk hunters specifically between that 10-year period of about 5,000 and an increase for non-residents at about 11,000. So just, to kind of round this out, these are other species that are targeted by non-resident hunters. So we pulled license information to see, what non-residents are purchasing. They're also purchasing black bear, wolf, mountain lion, migratory bird, upland game bird and turkey, antelope, and then of course they're going to put in for the moose, sheep, goat, and bison, those limited drawings as well. So now that we have looked at hunters money, hunters license sales, now we're going to look at location and hunter days. So where are they? So when we look at some deer hunter distribution by region, this one is specific. We kind of lumped them into each region just to see, again, the non-residents are orange, residents are blue. So we're seeing an increase in region 3 in non-residents too. A little bit of decrease in 4. 1 looks like it's decreased a little bit there. So this is for deer hunters specifically. Elk hunters, we did the same thing. Again, we're seeing, about the same for region 3. We're seeing less non-residents in region 1 in 2020 than we were in 2010. And we're seeing an increase in region 7 in 2020 as compared to region 1. So those were the ones that we had noted had a pretty decent increase. So this next slide takes kind of shows you regional changes in hunter distribution. So we kind of did the greatest and the least. So region 3 has seen the greatest increase. Region 6 also. Greatest decreases for deer, region 1 and region 5. Biggest increases are region 3 and 5 for elk. And then the greatest decreases are region 1 and 2 for elk specifically. So this is changing where those folks are hunting. So then we look at statewide hunter days. So we are looking at an increase in hunter days for residents. So they are getting out in the field more often, an increase of 55,000 days. A non-resident hunter, more days in the field are also increased. So we're seeing more folks out on the ground for longer periods of time. Same for elk. We're seeing a substantial increase for residents on hunter days for elk, 131,000 days. And then those non-residents are still increasing at 25,000. So across the board, again, 156,000 more hunter days were spent in that from 2004 to 2020. So the same information that we showed you a little bit before, that those elk hunter days by region, this is for deer. Again, we're seeing less non-residents in region 1 for deer than we have in 2010. And then elk hunter days by region as well. We just put them in a different graph to see them a little bit better. 2020 was down on those hunter days in region 1 as well. So the regional changes in hunter days, we're seeing increases in region 6 and 7 and decreases in 1 and 5 for deer, increases in region 3 and 4 for elk, and decreases in region 1 and 2. So then the last piece of this puzzle is access. So we're seeing increased license sales, we're seeing increased non-residents, we're seeing more hunters on the landscape, resident and non-resident. We're saying that they're staying out there longer. Now we need to look at, you know, how do they get there? What does the access look like? So this, we took this one program for block management, which is mostly the most broadly known access program that FWP has. So we did it by region so we could kind of have an idea. Enrollment has declined in block management by 1.5 million acres in, you know, from 2009 to 2021, but hunter days have increased by 133,000. So we've seen a pretty decent decrease, yet, you know, we've seen an increase in hunter days. So you can see just specifically in region 1, we've had a decrease in block management acreage from down 78,000 acres, down 11%. So you can see, you know, there is, I think 4 and 6 are the only areas that have increased in their block management. The rest of them have gone down. And that isn't to say that we don't have other access programs. This is just the one that we looked at for this particular presentation, and it is widely known and pretty established. So the elk hunting access agreements are pretty new, so we don't have a lot of really great data to share on those just yet. Excuse me. So this is just another a graph to show you the block management acreages by regions and to see how many of those there are. So we looked at hunter surveys to see block management use by residency for 2021. Regions with the greatest percentage of non-resident hunters are 6 and 7. So this is my last slide, and then I will open it up for questions. But basically, we're seeing that non-resident and resident license sales have increased since 2010. Resident hunters have decreased, non-resident hunters have increased. Hunter efforts have shifted from the west side of Montana to the east. Hunters are spending more time in the field, and private lands open for hunting in the past is decreasing over the last 10 or 12 years. So I open it up to you, Dylan. Can you help me facilitate some of those questions? And I'm happy to answer everything that I can.
Absolutely. Do you mind just going back to that last slide, the summary one? And then we can kind of let it sit there. You got to click back. And I'll just start off with my first question, because my simple mind always gets confused with points 1 and 2 there. So licenses have increased, but hunters have decreased. How does that work again? Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So bullet 1, resident, non-resident license sales, which means the cost of stuff. So non-resident combination licenses increase every year. So that's where that money's coming from. So more money is coming in because non-resident licenses get more expensive all the time. And because non-resident licenses increase all the time, it allows resident licenses to stay the same. The reason that ours are so cheap is because theirs are so expensive. So we do see an increase in revenue because they sell out every year. We have more applications than licenses available. And so statute allows us to keep a certain amount of that money. If you are successful and you don't get your elk permit, you don't want your license, then FWP keeps 20% of that license fee and then resells that license to another non-resident hunter at full price. Those are the kind of things that we talk about. We talk about revenue. And then resident hunters, so actually boots on the ground. Actual individual resident hunters have decreased and non-resident hunters have increased. So we're seeing more hunters specifically buy and B licenses because residents were given the opportunity to do that and they don't have interest in doing it, or they would have purchased already. Or we're seeing increases in upland game bird, we're seeing increases in wolf licenses, that kind of thing. So for this particular bullet, I separated those things out. Non-residents and residents, no matter what they buy, these are the trends holistically for those particular license holders.
Perfect, thank you. Go ahead.
Emily, this is Pat Tabor, and I just want to mention one other pertinent statistic as it relates to this. So the promulgation to bring in the youth hunt, the college hunt, and all that occurred in this same time frame. So recognize that 2,000 additional licenses to non-residents that were done by the legislature, primarily targeting ex-Montana residents that have moved out, that they wanted to provide the opportunity to come back, or youth hunts, things like that. So that's a meaningful statistic because it's people that the legislature and other people wanted to bring back, that they are, yes, non-residents, but they're your cousins, they're your brothers, they're people that moved out and are coming back. So I just want to clarify that, because sometimes it looks like, well, why more non-residents? It's all because of that legislature, because the 17,000 stayed where it stayed.
Exactly. Thank you for clarifying. That is important, that they were once residents of Montana. They may have grown up here and got a better job out of state, which we understand. They moved and they want the opportunity to come back and hunt with their families as they had, in the past. So thank you. If you have a question, I just request that you let me know what slide you're on so I can change what I'm displaying, and everybody can kind of look at what we're looking at as I explain those things.
Great, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
Hey, Emily, one suggestion here I just got from Molly, our chairperson, and I would agree with it too, because it's a little confusing. It's more reflective in bullet number 1 to say revenue. You're really talking about revenue. I was thinking almost like numbers of licenses and stuff, and you can misunderstand that. It's dollars increased. Does that make sense?
Well, these are, there's more license types available too, Lee, that this isn't just specific to revenue. There are more different types of licenses that we make all the time. We're separating out this and that, and then these are available, and these were a license once, and this is a permit, and it used to be included in your general license. So those, I see what you're saying, but I think I could make this clearer. You're right.
Okay, it's like everything, revenue, licenses, essentially all of it. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just tell you guys, I apologize up front. I live in this stuff elbow deep all the time, so sometimes I talk really fast and it can be confusing because I skip over just some stuff that I was like, oh, you guys know that. Maybe you don't. So please ask.
Go ahead, Pat.
I have a question on the same thing. On your summary there, Emily, is resident and non-resident license, and then resident hunters, non-resident hunters. That is all hunting types. So that includes upland bird, antelope. It's not just deer and elk, and you're summarizing that, correct?
Correct, yes.
Because it could be different if you're looking at just deer and elk, which you tend to focus on.
Just put it dollars.
And I think if you said that all, it might be more clarification as well. I have another question for you, I guess, Emily, right away. So one of the discussions we've had here before at our CAC meeting is the perception, and I think your presentation bears it out, as far as the number of non-resident hunters that are occurring and increasing across the state. We all have different perceptions. We've all had different experiences bumping into non-resident hunters and more hunters. But of course, then if we try to reduce those non-resident hunting licenses, we run up against that 80% of the revenue that funds most of the programs that we enjoy, such as block management and access and so forth, comes from non-resident sales. So obviously, if we reduce non-resident hunters and sales, then we have less revenue to work with. So since you're so immersed in with this, can you give us a silver bullet in terms of how you would fix the problem?
What's the problem?
That we want to see fewer hunters, but we want to maintain a revenue source.
I wish I did. I wish I had a silver bullet for you, but I don't. There is no easy way to fix this. If we do one or the other, we're going to have to change our revenue model, which, as you guys can see, we bring in a lot of revenue using our current model. So if we're going to do anything outside of that, it's going to take some major changes.
Go ahead, Mark.
Will there ever be need, or is there any consideration for putting quotas on the upland game bird license sales for non-resident hunters?
So yes, they tried to do that this year. It didn't work.
Okay.
They tried to do it in a legislative session and it didn't go through. So I would imagine they're going to start really pushing that next session, because I think Northeast Montana is seeing substantial increase in non-resident hunters for upland game birds and waterfowl and things like that.
Thank you.
Tom and Ian have your hands up. So Tom, you go first, and then we'll go to Ian, and then Molly's got a question.
I guess just a question about the permit versus license. I understand it, but it's fairly unique among the Western states to have that system. Is that a statutory setup, or is that by commission rule?
The statute license, how we designate those.
The breakdown between licenses and permits.
I think, and maybe Commissioner Tabor can speak to this a little bit more, but I think, licenses are definitely outlined in statute about what they're for. And I don't have a great answer for the permit question. And I'm not sure if that was set by the commission many years ago when we started expanding and restricting those opportunities as management needed. But it's pretty common, you're right, in the Western states to use this model.
No, it's not
So to
common.
answer your question,
It stands out as very unique from all the Western states to have a permit that's in addition to a license. Everyone else just sells tags or licenses.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Sorry about that. I misunderstood.
so I do have an answer. That is completely within the authority of the commission. So you might recall, and I forget what slide it was, but of the various tools.
Oh, I think it was like number 1 or 2, Emily.
So if you go back to slide 1 or 2, Emily, where it has the tools to manage population, one is by permit.
3.
Page 3, I believe. There you go. So permits allow the commission, if there's a species of concern in a district. So I'll take mule deer as a good example because it probably happens with mule deer most frequently.
Sorry, 6, Emily. Sorry.
It's slide 6, Emily. Sorry. So the department would come, and we have a live example of this because as we went around and talked about mule deer, one of the tools that is available is to consider going to special permit in certain areas where we're really concerned about mule deer. So what that would say is we're only going to allow. The ultimate protection is just close it to everybody, right? Nobody gets to hunt. Then the next prescriptive measure would be to put a limit. So like in the missions down in the Swan, you got to draw for a mule deer permit down there because there's a really low population. And so that's a privilege. And so the department would say in some of these areas, we think we need to go to a special permit. Now, what created a lot of the brouhaha in the last season setting, and it will obviously have a dialogue in the upcoming one, is when the commission utilizes the tool of special permit as a mechanism to do something other than a biological tool to affect the population in that district. So what had been happening in the past is they were issuing special permits as a social engineering tool versus a biological control tool. And so that, and if they want to do that, the commission can do that. So, but in answer to his question, which is a good question, you'll see the utilization of permits in areas where we are really genuinely concerned about a species. And now we're going to have to get really aggressive, and it's something just short of shutting her down. So did that answer your question on permits?
Well, it does, and I understand it completely, having worked in the agencies and applied across all the Western states. It's an unnecessary step that Montana has taken that, as the speaker said, leads to confusion because no one else does it. You could do the same thing with just calling them controlled hunt tags or controlled hunt licenses and avoid the extra step of calling it a permit. Every other state does the same thing, but treats them all like B licenses essentially. where you're under a random draw or a modified random draw like we have here. It's just adds to me, it adds confusion unnecessarily, and I'll leave it at that.
Eric, go ahead. I see you kind of thinking.
I think, I mean, it is a little bit confusing for people, but every Western state has a different set of verbiage that they use. Some states use licenses and tags, tags and permits, permits and licenses. You know, like there's a bunch of different words that people use and they mean different things in different states. And every state has the right to set it up the way they do. Montana is a little bit unique in that they have a general license where you can buy a general A tag and you can use it all over the state, and it's not like Antelope or something where every single unit has its own permit, and if Montana had that, they might not have two different terms. You would just buy a license for 101, 104, 605, whatever like that. But because we have general licenses and permits for specific areas, we need two different terms. So because of the way we do it, we have two terms, and also lots of other states have multiple terms that for these different kinds of things. So.
Isn't there also an effort to simplify rules and regulations? Were you talking about that in the last few years back?
Well, I
At
mean,
least with fishing regs, it was like wasn't there like a plain
FWP did it
language
the
or
last
something?
go around.
Oh,
across
so
state
Standardized regulations, yeah.
there you go. This is the simplified version. You're welcome.
Whether they were successful standardizing and reducing the regulations, I don't know.
So I can add a little history to that too. So at one time by statute, you could only possess one elk license. And so when we had cow specific hunts, the only way you could do that was to have a permit. And so there was a certain number of permits that were allowed to allow addition for cow harvest in some areas. So if you only had an antler bull license under general, but we wanted to have some cow harvest, you had to have a permit in order to hunt.
So that's probably the legacy.
So there's a legacy there.
Yeah, going forward.
Sure, go ahead, Benny.
I don't understand that resident numbers are down 13,000, but resident licenses and elk A and B and deer A licenses were all up. How do you reconcile that?
Could you hear that, Emily?
No. Can you repeat that, please?
On your data here.
What page?
What page?
What page?
Licenses were down 13,500, but when you break it down to elk A and B and deer A, all those numbers for residents are higher by several thousand. How do you reconcile that?
Slide are you on?
29 would be their, that would be the
She said
final.
that was boots on the ground, so I assume that was from survey data, meaning we're buying more
29.
licenses, but we're not actually going out to hunt. I read that as we're sitting on the couch after we make our purchase.
So non-resident was down, not resident.
No, residents.
So the sales went
Resident,
the
non-residents
opposite
were up, but
direction of
residents
the
were down
hunter,
by 13,005.
actual hunters.
And so what are you trying to reconcile that to?
Well, if you break
Okay,
it down,
so are we looking at slide 29 here when we're looking at total hunters? Is that where we want to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then go
So
back
this
to
is
look
total.
at deer A, B, and elk A and D.
This is all license
Yep.
tags.
So those are just specific to those license types, right? So we're seeing a resident increase in deer A and elk A licenses specifically, but this particular slide says total hunter residents. This includes all license types. So this includes fishing licenses. This includes upland game bird. This includes all of those license types. These other two slides before that, 21 and 22, are specific to deer A and elk A. So this is across the board. This is just people. We're seeing less resident people actually purchasing licenses. And, you know, as we just talked about, a person can hold multiple licenses, depending on what they are.
Okay, so then we have to assume that, or actually the data shows that the resident elk and deer hunters are up, which we all can see. Just look at the office out there any day of the week. But the decrease is from fishing and upland bird.
Well, it could be wolf licenses, it could be, just a number of things. There are several different license types, like this would include mountain lion and bear and turkey and all of that stuff. So this is total hunter. So if you,
follow to that, when you presented this slide, you said your literal words were boots on the ground, actual hunters. So my perception of that was survey data results, because you can make a sale and add revenue and an N of 1. I purchased these things, and then when I receive my survey call and they say, "Did you hunt this year?" I can report no. And so that's kind of, when you said boots on the ground, were you accounting for survey data, or were you just talking about the actual subspecies being sold?
I apologize. When I pull this data, I look for license, what we call our privileges. So when I look at something, these aren't actually humans out on the ground. This particular number displays licensed people, not if they've actually gone out into the field, because obviously there's some folks that buy licenses that never make it out. So these are the folks that purchase licenses. These are individual people, residents that have purchased licenses to do whatever. So I apologize, I did not make that very clear. So thank you for straightening that one out.
That's great, thank you.
Oh, good. Ian's virtual hand is getting tired, so go ahead, Ian.
Thanks, Emily. I guess I just want to start out. I appreciate the slide there. I've kind of been a little bit of a dork here, and I've taken a pretty deep dive into a lot of this stuff on my own. So this is, kind of filled in some gaps. It's very, very informative. A lot of stuff that I kind of, stuff that I saw myself. I guess just kind of in general, I guess, I mean, it's easy to, it's easy to go out in the field and have, some frustrations and whatnot, see, think that there's too many folks or whatever, but then you come back and you look at it, and I mean, yeah, a lot of these numbers are driven by legislative action. So it's kind of, we as sportsmen, kind of bring our arguments to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, yet things are, largely driven in this conversation through legislative action. I guess I'm just kind of curious on things that, maybe throw out like a little bit of a group discussion. I guess things that I see that might make a meaningful impact, like, maybe first and foremost, I've been kind of vocal about it. And in your slide did a, brilliant job of like one of the main drums that I was beating on when I was on the elk advisory group, that, Northwest Montana, I mean, our deer and elk populations have kind of plummeted recently, and, the word's out now. So, I mean, you can see it where, I mean, Flathead, Lincoln counties, I mean, we used to produce, from, on a percentage standpoint, I mean, we were a top contender nationwide for the amount of Boone and Crockett deer that we produced. Now, I mean, that's not the case. So people are, figuring that out. So if they come to Montana, I mean, they're showing up at, region 6 or 7 for deer hunting. So I mean, it's kind of, it's shown a multiplying effect. And I think that's why we're seeing the anecdotal reports of like, holy cow, there was, 3-to-1 non-residents over residents when I went to an Eastern Montana deer hunt. Like, is there any ability, I mean, this would be like a, probably a commission department driven thing. I mean, can we look at taking those 17,000 combo tags or something and, dividing them by 7 and linking, kind of starting to narrow down on the non-resident pool to, try to distribute the hunter pressure a little bit, because I mean, it's what's going on in region 6 and 7 and stuff from a mule deer standpoint, I think is, I don't know, I think it needs some attention.
I think anything that would, adjust those numbers would, generally speaking, be statutory to, require those numbers to be changed or shifted. I don't know that the commission would have.
No, not, I guess not. not necessarily like, I know the 17,000, but you guys, I mean, that's within the purview of the department, is it not, to say that, because, okay, if somebody draws a breaks bull tag, I mean, they go against, I mean, if they're a non-resident, that breaks, even though they drew that special tag, they go against that, 17,000 number, say, or so. I mean, can the department look at doing something to kind of try to actively distribute that non-resident pressure by basically saying, okay, we're still going to sell the same amount of tags, but we're going to say, non-resident, I mean, somebody's going to have to be forced to come up and embrace the suck and trudge around in the South Fork with me as a non-resident in order to take some pressure off other parts of the state. I don't.
So Ian, I think I have an answer to this, Emily. Could you go to slide 10?
Yeah.
So one of the things that's not analyzed on this slide is now, how does the 17,000 actually get distributed between outfitted and non-outfitted? DIY, I never do that right, and outfitted. So back in the OSL days, the outfitter sponsored license, there was that requirement. It was on the original slide that said, if you had an outfitter sponsored license, you could only hunt with an outfitter and only in their areas. And so when that went away, then all 17,000 tags, so if you hunted with an outfitter and you weren't successful, you still had a tag. You could go anywhere in the state and hunt. And so that was one of the negatives of 161, I think an unintended consequence. So then when they went back through and started the preference point system, and then that was codified even more in the last session before this one, of that 17,000, I believe it's 11,750 that are eligible for the outfitter preference point. And now, as a result of new legislation that just passed, and we'll see if the governor signs it, out of that 17,000, 1,500 licenses are going to be taken from this total and given to non-resident landowners. So if you take the 11,750 and the 1,500, those are tags that are being pulled away from the non-resident competitive public that competes with Montana resident hunters. Because the reality on outfitted license holders, they're going in areas that by and large residents are never going to get to go to, right? Because those are on ranches and places where those owners have decided they want an outfitter to take a client. So if all the owners of those tags go to those areas and don't go to the areas where you go, there's less competition. So one of the things we've seen since 161 went through is a very marked increase out of the 17,000 of the draw holders starting to go into block management, starting to go into these hunt clubs where they lease land on private land and going on to public land. That's a trend that's absolutely noticeable and is part of this analysis. So first of all, you got to do it by species. So when Scott or Pat, when you say you see so many, was that during deer or elk, or was that during upland game bird, or was that during bear? Because each one of them, we have to kind of isolate and say, what problem are we trying to fix? So as a commissioner, that's what I'm wanting to know from you guys, is say, okay, overall, we have the sense that there's more non-residents than there should be, or there's competition. But my question is, where and when, and for what species? As you see on deer and elk, it really doesn't actually, there hasn't been a market increase. The increase has really been more Montana raised people coming back and competing with you. So yeah, maybe a non-resident plate, but it's some guy that's born and raised here and he's hunting with his family, whatever. So what I want to do is try to isolate is, where are your pain points? What's happening here? Like, one of the things we knew that was happening that was unconscionable, and there was also legislation for this, was there was a lot of non-residents that didn't have A tags, and they were coming into regions 6 and 7, and they were piling does. You know, I I think there's a picture of one trailer that had like 18 does for 7 hunters, and they hauled them all out of the state, you know, and took them out of Region 6 because it was effectively unlimited doe tags. And those guys were over, and they were on block management, and they were doing all that. So that doesn't feel right. That feels like an abuse of resource. Now, having said this, and this is the other problem the commission's going to ask you to solve, you know, there are areas where we have to have unlimited cow tags because we're just not getting the job. We're not shooting enough cows in a lot of areas. And most landowners will tell you, shoot more cows. We can't get residents to shoot cows. But non-residents will come and shoot them happily all day long. So if you help the landowners solve their problem and shoot more cows, then they won't be inclined to bring in non-residents to help solve the problem if they're not getting it done by residents. So this is kind of the part of the coloring of this topic as we look at this collectively, is trying to understand these different things. So to your point, Ian, I think there has been a dialogue, and you know this being in the elk working group, is at what point does the state have to consider to start looking at hunt where you live, or, you know, start regionalizing hunting. So if you decide you want to be a Region 6 guy, then you hunt Region 6 exclusively, and you don't get to hop all around the state. Well, that is feels so unnatural to a Montana that was raised and can go anywhere they want, anytime they want. But are we getting to that point population-wise where we have to start thinking about channeling people to stay in different pockets and not have this overflow? Because now what happens is, as soon as something gets bad in one region, everybody floods to the next one. And so when you talk to the residents of 6 and 7, they'll tell you foreign license plates still have Montana on it, but they have a 15 or a 7 on it because they're all coming from here over there. So we're considered non-residents just as much as Washington plates and Minnesota and South Dakota and all that. So I just only offer that for more of the analysis to try to digest what we're trying to do here.
I got one thought is, what about, I mean, the quota set at 17,000, you know, talking loosely here. It's not a problem getting rid of those, right? More applicants currently than
Way more applicants
than tags available. There was not that, well, at least in my collective memory, there was a concern about not, I mean, there was surplus, you know, so something happened, whether it was price change or
economy was a big deal back then. It tanked.
So what about once you issue those to non-residents, whatever they are, then there, maybe you could go to, okay, what region are you on? You know, and you limit it at that, or they have to consider that. Perhaps then you have to set quotas.
Well, you have that with the outfitter preference point. So I know some of you thought, gee, that doesn't feel like very good because it looks like 161 all over again. But if a non-resident drew using an outfitter-sponsored preference point, they can only hunt with an outfitter and they can only hunt there. That license isn't good everywhere else in the state. So you just took 11,750 people out of the competition of hunting elsewhere in the state if you make them stay with that outfitter that helped them get that preference point.
That's really the breakdown, 11,700.
That's the maximum that we can get on the 17,000, and then on the 4,600, I think it's 75. Help me, Emily, on the percentages of what the preference points do.
75-25 on both. So 75% of that license allocation is designated for folks with preference, and that is given true preference. Like the guy with 3 going to get one before the guy with 1. And then that remaining 25 is distributed randomly to folks with no preference.
So at all times, people with no preference points or people below the initial cut will get 25% of the tags. The people with preference, and now outfitters sponsored clients have 1 point extra, so they tend to always have preference in preference points. That makes sense?
Yep, that's more likely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So this year in particular,
just this 17,000. It applies to nothing else but this.
Yep.
And so those people have to be designated, and now the 1,500 has to be designated. So now we took another 1,500 out of the 17,000 to compete. So now we're down to 11,750 plus 1,500. Anybody good at math? Out of the 17,000 that those are the people that theoretically can go anywhere they want and compete with Montana residents, you know, anywhere, wherever Montana residents are.
I think the important piece of data is what percentage of that 17,000 are actually hunting with an outfitter. Whether or not they have an outfitter preference point. There's a lot of people who watch Hunt and Fool and whatever, who have lots of preference points. They're never gonna hunt with an outfitter. So the question is.
So can I pipe in real quick?
Yeah, please.
So preference points expire if you don't apply in consecutive years. So if you didn't apply last year, the one that you had last year does not carry over to this year. Also, when you apply with an outfitter, you have to tell us at the time of application, I'm using, you know, Snowy Mountain Outfitters. And then I send Snowy Mountain Outfitters a list of everybody that said they were hunting with them. And so they confirm or deny. They're like, this guy is, never heard of that guy. So they actually endorse all of their clients to insure. And then outfitter sponsor or outfitter preference point license is printed and on the actual license. So if a warden stops you, they're going to look at your license or your e-tag or whatever, and they can tell if you're not accompanied by your outfitter, you're unlawfully hunting.
But I think the question Eric has is of the total 17,000 and those that successfully draw, how many outfitted clients out of the 17,000? Like in 22, I think the number was 8,200 or something like that.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't have that, but it's probably pretty close to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like 8,200 or 8,500. Because the original SB 143 that got defeated wanted to just fix this number and say, out of the 17,000, this will be this number, and then the rest will be eligible for it.
Sure.
So it's around that number. It's like 8,500 to 9,000. It can flex depending on how many applicants there are. But that number stayed pretty static all the way back to the 161 days. That the number of outfitter clients has hovered right in that range of, I think, an all-time low of somewhere like 4,800 to an all-time high during the OSL days when you could sell unlimited ones to, I think it hit 10,000 one year. But that came out of the 17,000.
No, that's helpful.
Ian, is your hand back up? Chime in if you got something here.
Yeah, it is. I guess, no, I mean, what Commissioner Tabor is saying that, I mean, that's kind of an anecdote. Like there's been some pushback on the outfitter sponsor tags from a selfish Montana hunter. I mean, I saw the writing on the wall there where, you know, you're potentially offloading some pressure back onto public ground, you know, competing with the public land hunter. But I don't think it's quite to that extent, because there's still a lot of those people that were, you know, like you said, 8,200 people in the draw. It might have mixed up who goes with, you know, what, but there's still, you know, still a significant portion even today that go with an outfitter. I guess thinking about, like, I mean, a couple things, like, I guess, like in my, you know, I kind of got a list here of, I guess, potential fixes. I mean, my opinion, like the low hanging fruit, like was said, it's like the B tags and the, I mean, allowing guys to, you know, come in, stack up multiple does, or, you know, even the cow elk tags. Those are the pools. Like if you look at percentage wise and license increase, those are the ones where we're seeing 100-200% increases. It's, you know, some of the doe tags or B tags, whatever. I guess, you know, given the winter that we had, I mean, luckily, you know, we had a lot of, I mean, Northwest Montana, we've got hammered a lot of other ways. I mean, we had a tough winter, maybe not, but I don't think comparatively, I don't think we did as bad as a lot of other areas in the state and whatnot. But like say Wyoming, looking at them, we all know that they had a tough winter. I mean, they already came out with, I mean, across the board, they've pretty much, I don't even know if you can buy a mule deer B tag period dot in Wyoming. You know, that would be a hard reduction, but I think it would be within the department's or the commission's purview to, I mean, could we look at those non-resident tags? Could we look at switching those to a private land only tag? So you address the, you know, I mean, any depredation complaints and that willingness, you know, of a non-resident come in and harvest that, but then take some of that pressure off of our public lands.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I think that was literally some of the remedies that we were tossing around when we were talking about, you know, the season setting, and we're taking it into context of shoulder seasons and how to cure this issue with the excess of cows. Like I talked to the Region 7 commissioner and he said, we just flat out got to shoot more cows here. And I don't care who does it and how it gets done. We got to get it done. It's just killing the ranches out here.
Right.
I mean, just period, statement. And he's a commissioner and he's trying to say, so if you're saying, well, we're okay for that as long as you can limit those cow hunters to private land and they just can't take that same B tag and then go do it on public land, that's fine. You know, and I think we did something precisely just that way, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, Ian, we've done private land B tags for deer in Region 1 to address game damage where they were concentrated, but we didn't feel we had the numbers outside of those areas. But in the legislature, there was a Senate bill that did pass that limits a non-resident to 1 B tag for deer. Unless they actually drew the big game combo, then they could get 2. Whereas in the past, you could get 7. And so that was a legislative directive that passed and went through, but it was for deer. It didn't apply to elk, and I'm assuming it's because we're so over objective and not getting the harvest that we need there.
Yeah.
Yep.
In these comments, I mean, I guess like my comment there doesn't really apply at all to, you know, I mean, this is not a region 1 comment. This is more thinking about the, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7 type areas. I mean, I think in general, it's something that, like, I mean, our B tag structure in the state, I mean, I was vocal on this on the elk advisory group, you know, or, you know, you go down to Dillon now, if I get a cow tag, it's a B tag. So it allows me to, you know, I go down, I shoot a cow. I used to be done. I used to have a permit and I used to have to cut my egg tag. Well, now, you know, because there's a hunter numbers issue, but I think the bigger picture is like the hunter days issue. I mean, we have less hunters, but we have more tags. To Ben's kind of question, you know, well, how does that work? Well, we have less resident hunters on the landscape, but each one of those resident hunters is packing more tags. Therefore, we're seeing an actual increase in overall hunter days, I think is what the data is showing. And that's, I mean, anecdotally, that seems like what I'd be seeing. So now you go down to Dillon, you have a cow B tag in your pocket or one of these other areas, you know, that's valid for public land. I shoot a cow and now I hunt for horns the entire rest of the season. So I'm putting pressure on that public land that then, you know, redistributes elk off of the public. It's that public land pressure. So I'm just wondering if we, you know, I'm 100% for taking care of the issue where the issue exists and, you know, getting all these B tags into people's hands where it's going to make a meaningful impact. But I'd be really interested to know of a single area in the state where we have a overabundance of elk on public land that we can fix with public land tags. I would think 90% of those areas, it's not that we have too many elk on public lands, you know, say Region 7 where there's a complaint. It's where we, you know, it's the private landowner that's being impacted. And I'd say, you know, let's get more tags into people's hands on the private lands, and then try to limit some of the pressure on the public, so we're not forcing those animals off of public and creating more of the issue on private. It's kind of a long-winded deal, but
I think that's a well-founded theory and belief, and I believe that will have legs in this next go around. I think as the commission looks at remedies, it will probably focus on that as being one of the guiding principles, if it's stated in the elk management plan. So
Yeah.
so I want to really emphasize that, because without a prescriptive and well-authored elk management plan, these remedies look like one-off. And that's
Right.
what we got to get out doing here. We got to get a master plan that really gets after what we're trying to do here. And that's why I asked Pat, what problem are we trying to fix? Because I want the elk plan to speak to it.
Yeah. No, to me, it was just, we heard that before, just the number of non-resident hunters, and if we cut that down, then where do we place our revenue from? So trying to find that balance. But I have a question for Emily. If you go to your next slide on page 11, and you gave us 3 examples of your 10% non-resident. The example you did not give us is if you have an unlimited elk area, that 10% doesn't apply to unlimited area, right? So the 17,000 cap still applies. So when hunters are out there and they come across a bunch of non-resident license plates, are they in those areas that are unlimited? And you could see an increase of number of hunters that are non-resident in those areas because they're unlimited. The East Fork of the Bitterroot, for example.
So,
How many?
so what
how
we're
many
talking
other
about.
Go ahead.
So what we're talking about here, when you're talking about 17,000, you're talking about their general licenses. When you talk about unlimited, you're talking about a permit. They have to draw that license first before they're even entered into that permit draw.
Right, but they're not capped at 10%. So you could get more than a couple hundred non-resident hunters into a unlimited unit because there's no cap of the 10% that does not apply in that unlimited unit, correct?
That's
Only
correct.
Only
Yes.
for B.
But what about it doesn't apply for the general license?
Well, you already have your 17,000 caps.
I know, so, but,
Yep.
so we're capping here, like, at the number of applicants for non-resident, the quota, if it's 100, they can only have up to 10. But if you're an unlimited, let's say a bunch of these non-residents apply, like for the East Fork of the Bitterroot, which is an unlimited unit.
It's the general state.
Is that the only one in the state? That's how many other ones there were, but you could have several hundred. I mean, as long as they're not over the 17,000 cap, you could still have a lot of non-residents that get pushed into one unit if it's unlimited, because we're not capping the percentage of non-residents in there.
But if it's an A tag, it's always still gonna have the overall limitation.
I get that. So you can never, I mean, you're not gonna get more than 17,000. If you put them all in one unit, you'll never get more than 17,000, but you could get 16,999 in one unit theoretically, because we don't have a 10% cap on it.
Right, so this is one of the reasons why, one of the suggestions that came up for the commission is, if you had more unlimited districts across the state, like all of them, but choose, you had to choose.
Yeah.
Similar to what now works with Lions. You're gonna channel people, because then you won't have all 8,000 of the non-residents go to one district. They'll be dispersed throughout the state. Because what happens now is they tend to choose the areas and they overrun some areas, and then there's others where you don't see anything. And you have this push-pull effect. So it's a tricky business when you're trying to use limited, unlimited, all these different tools. And because it's a little bit like trying to fix a roof by putting additional shingles on, and by the end of 30 years, you've got patches on top of patch. I know, because I pulled one of these off on a cabin on our property one thing, and I found a sign from 1940. But that's kind of what's happened here. All these remedies to try to hit quota and all this. And so there's a piece of you that wants to say, time out here, what are we trying to do? So a good elk plan will maybe get us more focused. But that was one of the things that we were looking at, is saying, if you had a lot more unlimited districts, then you could disperse use across the state. Otherwise, you're forcing them to the areas where it's easiest.
You're talking unlimited permits.
Unlimited permits, but the 17,000 cap will always remain.
Right. I know that's there.
So we're just trying to figure out where to put that 8,500 to whatever.
I was trying to think how many unlimited units we have across the state, and disproportionately within those units that are unlimited, you could see more non-resident hunters because there's not a 10% cap.
To the extent of the 17, how many of our 17,000, out of the 17,000?
Go ahead, Mike.
I have a couple questions and then a suggestion. I think we got to this topic for this meeting because we talk about licenses in every meeting. And at the last meeting, I believe, Commissioner Tabor, you had said, what about forming a subcommittee to get really deep in the weeds with the data and talk about that? And I feel like this presentation was a tip of the iceberg of showing raw deltas, but no tests of significance or any GIS. And what I'm also hearing from people in this room a lot is we can't talk about something in a vacuum, but we also can't talk about the state and generalities. And so I wonder if the management plans are also taking a similar approach as what we're doing on the rivers with the CRMPs. There's these outstandingly remarkable values. And I think what I'm hearing more and more and more is it's not about I went hunting and I got a bull, but it's I went hunting and I was pissed because I ran into a bunch of people and that ruined my week off work, right? So I think to modernize the approach, I'd like to see a consideration of us looking at the whole outstandingly remarkable values of our hunt being not just about the success of the tag getting punched or not, because that's what I hear from people more and more and more. Like, you're not mad that you didn't punch your tag, you're mad because your trip was ruined. And so if we're looking at our management plans with that kind of a lens in combination with identifying what are the problem units, and we can get really, really specific. Like, I have hours and hours and hours of data, as I'm sure Ian has on his computer, where the state makes all of this data available, and I wait on preference points, and I look across all the bull tags in the whole state and look at the delta between residents and non-residents and landowners and non-landowners, and you can come up with these statistics that identify areas where maybe more actual focus of individual unit research could lead to, is this an area that you'd want to filter more people? Or is this not an area where you'd want to filter more people? Is this an area where if you give only private permits out, you're going to piss off the masses? Because they're already pissed thinking that you're giving away too many opportunities to private landowners, because that's a very common theme that I'm sure your inbox gets full of as well. But if you can stitch together a comprehensive lens with all of those factors at once and identify pilot units where you can go do some work, I think you can actually move the needle. We see a lot of areas where really innovative biological changes were made where the elk populations are really, really healthy, you know? And I think the modernized approach would be to also add in how people are feeling about their hunt as well.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So the one thing I would say about that and related to the elk management plan, that's where I get to, we have to have a stated set of values. And so now you've added this new element to it, which is really unique, and that is the quality of the experience regardless of the outcome. But I tell you right now that traditionally, the history of this state has been about opportunity. Provide the most amount of opportunity possible. And then we've had this ever-growing perspective that it's really about quality. So there's a unique hunter set that says, I will forego killing a certain size animal. I've done enough of that, and so I'm only looking for this. And so therefore, I'd like to see the department manage for that. Because there's a lot of areas where you go to and you can't find a bull bigger than, this, because there's lots of pressure on it. And so that's a different value system. So you get two people in the same room with those two different values, they want something different out of the system. And the overall state system has to accommodate everybody. Where that gets done and articulated should be in the plan. And then it should get to the point where it's prescriptive enough so we know how many districts to set aside for trophy, how many for opportunity. And now you're introducing yet another variable in here with regards to qualities, and the same thing as you say applies to fishing. So some people are looking for that wilderness fishing experience, but they're looking for it outside one of the largest urban areas in our state, which is a little unrealistic, but that's, that happens. So these are all factors that have to happen. I still think that the plan is the place to get it done, but I do like the concept of getting a lot of smart, especially math-oriented people that aren't necessarily tied to the past and saying, is there different ways we can cut at this? What I think we do know is we can't keep doing patchwork, and we also know we're not shrinking, and there's going to be more growth. It's just inevitable. It's what happens. And so we do need a blueprint. Whether that is a public department mixture, think tank, or how that gets done, I don't know. I know that the director tried really hard in his selection of his ELK committee to get a diverse group of people that weren't advocating so much for their NGOs and all that, but were more about trying to really come up with innovative ideas. No idea is a bad idea, let's throw them all out there. So, I mean, I think this is all the right dialogue and heading in the right direction, but I'd be kidding you if I said, well, here's the answer. Now you know what keeps commissioners up at night. This is damn tough, hard stuff to figure out.
I think the acknowledgement that there's a lot of social science to this, just the acknowledgement in the plan, any given plan is helpful, you know, and then having a long-term plan of, we know that a finite resource is in one way or another, whether it's distributed across non-resident or resident, is likely going to be a commodity that is going to be more valuable to somebody. How the distribution occurs is kind of up to I would say, the department and the legislature and all that. So somehow displaying that in these plans is important. I feel at least. Where do we want to be in 30 years, 40 years with the social pressures, the opportunity to put meat in the freezer, all those things, you know, not just, is the plan for, is it a 10-year plan? Are these plans, you know, the elk management plan for 20?
Scheduled for 15, but with updates every 5 potentially.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot's
So
gonna
not
change in
like-
15 years here. We could have 1 million people in this valley, and so.
Right, to put these numbers into context, I just pulled up in the census data and it's 133,452 resident increase in Montana as a whole from 2010 to 2020. And that doesn't capture the COVID influx post 2020. So when we talk about just raw numbers and talking about these deltas, I want to keep that in the context too, that like the percent going to residents and everything, the resident pot has gotten crazy.
And that's not gonna change. It doesn't seem like, right? So considering those pressures, I guess, on the resource is important, at least me, you know, in the future. I don't have any answer, of course, it's a tough nut to crack, but consideration of that is I think, key.
Well, and the reason the funding keeps coming up, so like if Neil will tell you this, you know, the way I'd like to do population, the way he'd like to do population estimates is using the best science that's available. And we slobber and look in envy at some of the systems and things they get to do in other states because of the funding they get versus what we have available here. So they do the absolute best they can for the money that's allocated for doing what they could. Are there better ways to figure this stuff out and we could get better population data? Yeah. Is it expensive? Oh my God. So, you know, some of our population estimates, especially on predators and things like that, is the best we can do with what we have. So now if we start saying, yeah, well, let's toy with the thing and get non-residents and pull the funding for what little funding we have, you know, to drive what we're doing, that doesn't feel too comfortable because we need more money to do what we want to do, not less. And where's it going to come from? And, you know, I remember when we went through 140, that was the first license increase I think we had in 14 years. And the director drove that process. That was a special project for it. Did a phenomenal job of pulling everybody together. But you would have thought that we were asking, you know, like a bond, you know, thing on an election or something, you know, and I think overall the increase was pretty minor. I don't know, like $20 or $25, but oh my God, you would have thought that you're asking for the firstborn. So could you imagine, I've had people come up and say, I would gladly pay more for my resident license if it meant that less non-residents came in. I said, okay, 1,500 sound good?
Yeah.
Right? No, I was thinking maybe, you know, instead of whatever it is, $100, you know, 112, you know, it's like, yeah, we're not gonna get that there. That was complex stuff.
Tom, I saw your hand pop up and then I think Ian's hand popped up, but go ahead, Tom.
Well, I'll just take my soapbox and say all those topics you've been talking about with the numbers of people and looking at all those numbers that were presented, I would guess that almost all of those trend lines are non-significant. They're slopes on them are minimal. And if you looked at that compared to some of the numbers of people, total people, not just hunters in the state, we are declining drastically as a portion of the population. Montana's probably the last place in the country that's going to feel it, but we're going to end up losing hunting because of that discrepancy between hunters and non-hunters as part of the population.
Well, the other side of this is that I've had my place here for 34 years, so that's about half my life. And I've also noticed that the carrying capacity of Reserve and Highway 2 is completely out of control. The whole infrastructure is inadequate. We just have to maybe accept the fact that the commission's doing a pretty darn good job. The department's doing a pretty darn good job. And it will never be, with the population well over 1 million, and crap, it was 700 or something when I bought my place here, that it's never going to be back to what it was, but we just want to run it as efficiently as we can with the resources we have left, with the monstrous development. I mean, crap, go 1 mile this way, or this way outside town. And 10 years ago, what was wheat fields full of, Canada geese is a housing development. And not 1 out of 10 of those is buying a hunting license or particularly worried, So, maybe we need a little bit of a perspective. And I know it's tough if you grew up here and we're like, I remember when I was 14 and I did this and saw that. Well, that's kind of gone. And like I said, I want everything to go as good as it can, but we got to be realistic about where we are, what we've got to deal with, and a lot of issues like that, and also just to throw in a little interesting twist is we're talking a lot about public lands. Well, the vast majority of public land is not state, it's federal. So if I lived in, Colorado, New Jersey, and pay my federal taxes, I own as much of that national forest as everybody else does, and nobody wants to kind of discuss that angle. But why do I have more access to a federal piece of property than any other of the 330 million people that live in this country? I mean, that's just a little twist to throw out there, but I'm just saying, I think we need to just understand this is what we've got, be thankful, and manage it the best we can. But it's never going to be back, and there's going to be license plates from all over. Crap, I sit at the stoplight, watching 10 RVs blow through Libby, and there's not, at every light change, whatever. That's just, it's the reality.
Flathead County pass into the park?
Yeah. Well, I get the chills when I see a 7 plate poaching in Lincoln County. I'm out there in the picture and go, what are these 7 plates doing over here? Go home. But, like I said, there's
Montana flathead.
We got to be realistic about our views of what can be and how wonderful it was, and it's still really, really great. It's why people want to come here. But anyway.
I just remembered this because I got the mail this week, as I'm sure a lot of you did. Can we stop getting our $4 back? Like, that would save a ton of money.
You can donate it to Block Management.
I have to check the box, and my husband did my purchase this year. So. Can you make it dummy proof?
You ought to be able to train him.
Can you just take it away?
It could be an opt-out box instead. Said this will be forwarded to Block Management unless you check this box requesting a refund.
And you know where the science
that might be better.
Works? It's 401ks. You're compulsively entered with your employer if your employer has one. And turns out you save your money that way. The state can save their money.
Well, I didn't want to sound like a wet blanket, but
No,
that's just, I think we need to be practical.
It's a really good perspective, Jay.
Thank you.
I moved here in 2016.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Your grandfather did. And I want to acknowledge, Shelley made a comment along these lines too in the chat about just acknowledging and asking for, when the discussion comes up about the decrease of ungulates, where are the studies for the decrease of habitat and segmentation of habitat due to an increase in human population and expansion of buildings that decrease open wildland habitat. So that, as well as the slides Emily showed about block management numbers down 1.5 million acres. So for sure, less space to roam. Tom, I don't know if you didn't have anything else. I'll go to Ian. If your hand's still up. Go ahead, Ian.
Okay, guess I was gonna go back to the dollar thing. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but like as far as our license fees, that's all legislatively driven, is it not?
Correct.
Okay. Because I mean, just looking at, I think, I mean, I know what, yeah, I mean, if you ask me, do I want to pay more for an elk tag next year for the same elk tag? 100% my answer is going to be no. Because I mean, I feel like the quality of the experience is getting diminished. So I'm not going to want to pay more for less. But if the question was posed to it's never been posed to sportsmen in Montana, to my knowledge, would you pay more to balance the budget and see a reduction in non-resident hunting pressure? I think you get an entirely different response. I mean, just like quick numbers, I think they're right. The resident pays $1,208 for a deer elk combo. So that's like, times the 17,000, roughly that's 20,500,000. If you divide that by, looks like the breakdown is that there's about, out of that 170 some thousand resident hunters, I think there's about 134,000 elk tags that are purchased. So I mean, you could eliminate all of that 17,000 if people paid $143 more for their elk tag. Now, I mean, that's not gonna happen, but I mean, it cost me over $100 to fill up my pickup to go hunt for a weekend. So I mean, decrease in pressure, increase in opportunity. I mean, I don't know. I just feel like a cost side of thing, like there could be better questions asked on that avenue. I know that's not going to be everybody's flavor to pay more, but I mean, to pay more and see less pressure. I mean, I just hope that we can get to that. That's not a FWP thing. That's more of a commission, or sorry, a legislative thing. But I hope the question could maybe be phrased a little bit differently, especially on the some of the unregulated, over the counter, the upland hunting or other stuff, because who has a bigger impact on the landscape? Somebody sneaking around coulees trying to find a deer, or somebody with 3 springers, flushing birds and shooting shotguns, as far as distributing animals off of public onto private or whatever. So maybe I'm hoping that at some point residents can step up a little bit and try to decrease some of the pressure that way.
So two other pieces of information that I think that are helpful for you guys to understand, especially on the funding. So one of the things you have to understand is the importance of the Pittman Robinson dollars that come in, and how they come in, and then how that draws more federal funding and the matching and everything else. And that's part of the formula. And a great deal of that is driven off of, again, the license sales and the non-resident activity. And then you brought up non-resident, the federal land participation. And so there have been a series of lawsuits challenging states that try to go basically no non-resident. And so you have that parameter, and you have now on the books, decisions made by courts that say you have to stay within this realm and provide opportunity for U.S. citizens. So that's just an additional set of, ingredients or spices in this stew we're talking about. And so I just think it's important to know that there's so many of those factors. There's a kind of a reason why we are. And then lastly, I'll comment that legislatively, it was brought up to control, I think it was Senator Flowers' bill to control the number of, and I want to say that this might have been at BHA's request. Some of your members might know this, but that did not even make it out of the Fish and Game Committee. And then Senators Nolan and Hurst had a bill that right up until I think it was just a week ago had it where they were gonna limit the number of days in the field for a non-resident license holder, and that got killed in the House committee. And so when you say well, we're gonna have to get at this legislatively, there was a real earnest effort by a number of groups to try to get at it legislatively, and there just isn't an appetite in this legislature right now for that. And I think part of it is because of the whole mixture of the economic engine and the economy and tourism, all of the things, it all factors in. So, one of the things the department has to keep considering now when it makes proposals is, if you're going to propose something, what's the economic impact on the rural area that you're proposing that on? Is if you put a lot of people out of work proposing something, that's a factor. And so when we get into the social part, that's where it really gets critical. We're going to save animals or fish. That's one thing. We get to do that. But if it's now moving into the social elements, it gets a little trickier. So again, this is just information. I'm not advocating for a position either way. I just want to make sure you're educated as to what the issues are.
And that's a good point, because the economic thing is huge, and I don't think Susie's Cafe in Shodo really cares whether you're from, they probably do care whether you're from Washington or from Shodo, because if you're from Washington, you're gonna eat there 2 meals a day, 7 days. So it's a big deal that those non-resident people, whether they're non-resident me going over there to hunt, or non-resident guy from Utah going there to hunt. And those communities do get, our council in Libby talks all the time about the tourism. Tourism's a huge thing up in our area, and you do something that restricts that, whether they're hunters or RVers or fishermen, it's huge up in that part of the county. It's a big deal, and a lot of people that you wouldn't expect, get very upset and pretty excited about that stuff when you start making those noises. So, that's another reality that you have to deal with.
It's a challenging balancing act of all of us, and you're trying to juggle.
A lot of people, a lot of interests.
You throw in things like, look at when I learned to hunt, I learned the good spot by going out there and getting there, right? Well, now you get on a hunting forum, or you get on an aerial photo or a map, and you know that, oh, yeah, if I just go right over this ridge and down that ridge, look at that area that I can get to. And now I've got that ability and knowledge at my fingertips, where it might have taken me years or a generation of father to son to know that that's the spot to go, and you're right there. So your hunting hole now, everybody knows where it's at, so you got that to compete with. And just the ability to travel and move now. When I was a kid, just the fact I had to drive to Augusta to go do something, it killed me. It's 20 miles. Now you
wagon, box cart,
A long time to get there.
School was uphill both ways. But now you can travel. It's nothing to load up for me to grab my kids. We're gonna run over home or back home and go fishing for the day, and it's 175 miles you spin around. So people are more mobile. You take a flexible work schedule now. Stay at home. You're working from home. I'm gonna go hunting in the morning, hunting in the evening, and I'm gonna work in the middle of the day and maybe late at night.
Yeah.
That throws that other person out there, the non-resident who now is the resident hunting out there. He's a resident hunting, but for the last year or two, they would have been a non-resident. Lots of things out there that really changed it, and definitely no silver bullet. Maybe ask that AI chatbot what the solution is. It might be able to spit something out for you. Try that, Dylan.
Commissioner Tabor, if funding weren't an issue, how far south could the needle move on that 17,000 number though, without getting in trouble with the feds? How many?
It's at where it is. The 90-10.
That's where it needs to be.
Is kind of the standard across the western United States. And I think it was an Arizona case that created that as the somewhat standard that all the states promulgate towards. So I believe Wyoming is now contemplating legislation to get to a 90-10. But if you try to dip below the 10% allocation, that's when you're going to get into trouble, and you might have some issues in federal court.
We're a long ways from that right now. I mean, we're 30% non-resident hunters overall.
Well, I think it's in the context of what you're trying to control. So it's apples and oranges when you take the statistics of 30% hunters, and then you wind up counting like bird hunters, which I don't think a lot, maybe there is one or two of you that's really feeling the bird pressure, but most people don't give a hoot.
Yes, you can feel it. It sucks.
Yeah.
It's all, it's bird hunters that are out there when you're trying to hunt that deer in the
Yeah.
coulee bottom, that's
Yeah.
where they see it.
Or
too.
we
Yeah.
antelope
But
and bird hunt
Yeah.
in the same week.
That's where you get it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But, you know, that's why incentivizing to get access, so, you know, we didn't talk about access a lot, but remember that Emily had it on her slide, and so, you know, I'm really, really happy about the package of bills that the coalition put together. So I don't know if you heard about that, but they ticked off 4 or 5 things, and this is outfitters getting together with Wildlife Federation and different people that ordinarily don't play well in a sandbox. And they hammered out 5 or 6 pieces of legislation, agreed upon it, and passed it as a package. So part of that was essentially doubling the cap on block management, which now starts to become financially meaningful. It used to be that, quite frankly, for the hassle it is for a landowner to put their property into land management, what you get back in the way of compensation, you know, doesn't cover the collection of garbage for a week. And so now the number is starting to get, is it meaningful enough? Does it compete with what private lease clubs or what outfitters will be willing to pay for access? Perhaps not, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was. And I think one of the other interesting statistics on her slide where it showed the decrease in involvement in block management, when 161 passed, collectively, the private land community was pretty upset about that. And one of the ways they showed their distaste for it was pulling out of block management. So there was a massive exit of that program as a response, as a retaliation to 161. And so it's taken us years to recover, to come back up, where people are starting to engage in it. And I think these appreciation dinners are fantastic. I think the program that you were in, the Master Hunter, and focus on really trying to create a respectful, encounter for the landowners, so it's a positive versus a negative. These are the things that are going to carry us in the right direction, because there's just only so many places we can go. We can't invent any more public land. Yeah.
But we can put animals back on it.
Yes.
We got to do that in the Northwest to help this situation.
Go ahead, Eric.
I don't really feel the pressure issue personally, but I do think it's interesting as we talk about the population trend increasing, and I think our effort should be put on not necessarily decreasing hunters or decreasing opportunity by tag allocation, but instead increasing opportunity based on access, and whether that's deeded or not deeded. And I've really appreciated just the concept and my experience on the new WMAs in the last 2 decades. Glad to hear about the BMA thing. I appreciated that when that was proposed and now passed. I would rather see the department really push trying to, get access to more places, have the funding by whatever mechanism they need to purchase those really special places like Bad Rock and Marias and the Snowies and other, some of those kind of things that are amazing pieces of ground. And I think those are going to be, there's opportunities for other great places in some of these population centers that will maintain access, and even if it's just for kids or something. But yeah, I'd like to see the focus on access.
I think it's worth mentioning it, like Lee and his team here, but virtually every region, they have worked so hard on the reach out and trying to, like, especially in this region, to retain what could be a catastrophic loss of, the old Weyerhaeuser stuff. And, Jim started at least picking up where, getting to those people, giving them good reasons to do it. And that whole system right now on trying to improve relationships with landowners and get them into the program statewide, that team of FWP is doing amazing work. And make sure you thank them, but the best way you can thank them is when you do access block management, be the most respectful hunter there is to man. Ask them if you can help with their chores, you know, pick up trash even if it isn't yours, because that positive experience will lead to hopefully more enrollment. And I'm telling you, Montana's special with that tool, because you go across the rest of the western United States, it doesn't exist. Not like that. That's something special. I hope we hold on to.
Increasing access by 10% on private land would make more, would be way more valuable than decreasing, hunters on the landscape by 10%.
Well, we're down to last stretch here. We got 14 minutes left. This has been a great conversation, though. It's been really good. So hopefully it's kind of met everybody's expectations for this topic. But feel free to, any other parting thoughts or questions or anything? This has been great, though.
One question, kind of you, is, you said you know people in Region 7 that just want cow elk killed. Is there a
kind of directory?
I was gonna ask you later. No, I'm kidding. No, but I mean, is there a mechanism in the department? Are we taking that information and making it, it's a fine line, right? That information and conveying it to the public particularly, and I understand it, and it ties to that relationship, that building and maintaining those things. Is there a mechanism in place to get that information out selectively and effectively so that a rancher, wherever they are, is expressing that interest, it's not depredation based, it's, they control that access completely.
There's been some experiments, like in Region 4, the regional supervisor there has been pretty proactive in trying to get word out. And what we don't have is a systemic approach, and I think there's an appetite for that, and I believe that the department would look at that. I also think that there's examples of where this happens in other places, and it could lend itself to a really slick, commercial type application. So somebody might launch a website and say, cowhunts.com, and then have an enrollment fee and stuff, and then it could be a central clearinghouse for that. I know in looking at other states, what would help a lot is if the people that want to participate, that they do have some kind of credential or reputation for being respectful hunters, and that you have to earn your right to be on that list and have that access, because it will only work, because what we don't want is what happened with Buffalo, in the Yellowstone. That's what they don't want. So when some ranchers will say, I need help here, but I also don't want a shit show. So, yeah, so
Put it in the paper.
Yeah, and so it is word of mouth, and so, I can say, contact this guy, and he can put you in contact. And,
I'm not asking for that information, it's more.
I know you're not personally, but I think it would be a great solution if we had a.
No, I mean, it's a really good way to manage his objective.
That's how my dad hunts in Oregon,
Yeah.
and he has for the last 15 years. He got done looking for horns, and he and his 5 buddies do a cow elk hunt. They get one apiece.
That's
every
where I'm
year.
at now.
That's all I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I want the freezer filled first, and then I'll go for the experience. I'll climb up the middle for
Yep.
it if I want to get a little.
Yep.
It's not a problem,
But it's
And I
totally
relish
just like networking with buddies.
How can we do that effectively, respectfully out of?
I agree, and so.
Private landowners, priority.
I'm gonna ask.
Yeah.
And I'm sure these guys are too, but, it's a great suggestion.
I think we've done it at a certain scale, when we get if we have a management season, type of situation, or a shoulder season, we've talked to landowners. If they want to know people and people are willing to provide it, we'll put them directly in touch with that landowner. Or some of those hunts that we had in Region 4 where we had a hunt coordinator, where we were trying to kill elk, and they were lining the spots out, talking to the hunters on where to go and when, but not just a clearinghouse that would really give you a big deal. And I think it's the hardest part is having something broad brush like that when each landowner is a little bit different on just how much they're willing to tolerate of people coming, because it can be overwhelming.
Well, and how much trust they have with the agency, right? I mean, that.
Right,
Even
agency
Not
trust
just
and
agency, just
the
hunters in general.
Well,
Right, even
right,
before
but what
the
I'm getting at
official
is like,
don't go
what
back
if
to
there was an
those
extra day of hunter's
like
education?
Alex covered,
Where
you know,
people, like I had to do something,
Master
where I
hunter
showed up an
program.
extra day.
Master
Yeah,
hunter program.
but something, yeah, that's an idea, but I mean, how many people can we, some sort of system like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Where you show up for a day or two and you show your commitment to being on a reference list of
I
some
think
sort.
POPW's tackling this, aren't they? They're really looking at,
The,
we're trying to merge the master hunter, the public land, the landowner stewardship program, hunter education. They're trying to find a way to meld it all. Jim? Yeah.
Yep, well, and I,
Or sorry.
I just got accepted onto a full hunter ed work advisory council, so, you know, we're open to this, but I've been pushing one, the department has the hunter landowner stewardship, it's an online course, and I've suggested that they brush it up and match that with a field day that would be focused more on hunter behavior and ethics. And if somebody would go through both steps, then they would get a certification on their conservation license, and that might open some gates. Come up with another type of block management or something that would, you know, allow that. So the landowner has confidence, they got somebody who's a little more committed, and the hunter who wants to do a bit more can do it. So I'll be working on that.
I think those are good ideas. That, you know, part of the problem that I see is, you know, I've been in for 30 years and I've knocked on a lot of ranches and stuff like that. And it was probably, I don't know, 10 years ago, Public Land and Water put together the map that they got all the outfitter data from FWP and said, okay, here's elk habitat and here's overlaid with them on a leased property as far as, you know, that overlays with elk. And literally like 80% of all elk habitat on private land was being leased out. So I go knock on doors, what I get is, I'd love to have you hunt, but I can't because I'm contractually required to just not have anybody hunt because of my contract they have with the outfitters. And when you look at that map and see how much of Montana across the state is dedicated to outfitters, we can have the most polite hunters, we can have the best ethics. I can knock on doors and they're like, I'd love to help you because I get that lot. I'd love to help you out, but I can't. And they want to. I mean, there's some really good ranches out there that would love to have more hunters come on their property and help, and then but they can't because they have a contract that says they can't. Like, no, we'll come back and knock on my door during the shoulder season, but during the regular season, they just can't let people on. So how do we address, you know, the amount of lands that are leased to outfitters? And I'm not bad mouthing outfitters, but I mean, that's just a reality. How do we address that issue? We can have the best hunters in the world, we still can't get on because of contracts.
So that will hopefully get dealt with if BMA payments can not, you know.
Can compete a little bit,
Yeah,
so.
can compete a little
So
bit
that
with
that
outfitters.
wide swath of landowners, so first of all, the percent, I'm not sure what you're looking at, but for the 15 years that the Board of Outfitters was maintaining data, because they're taking the operations plan and then they were overlaying it, using the data and trying to create a map of outlay. I think at its maximum level, it was something like, I don't know, like 2 million, 3 million acres under lease. And so there's a lot of other arrangements out there that are actually not outfitted. And so the biggest uptick of private land tie-up right now is private clubs and corporate lessors. And Cabela's and groups like that started that. So if you go to a specific region, you might see 3 ranches tied up with outfitters and 6 tied up with private club hunting. Like one of my buddies over he used to always go and hunt at this guy's ranch for mule deer, trophy mule deer area. And, you know, the landowner said, no, I've got a very wealthy guy from Tennessee. There's 5 of them. They put in every year. 1 of the 5 do it, and they've tied up our entire ranch for a fee that nobody can touch. And we need it because, by the way, cows are often, you know, so they have to do the economic decision. They have to. And I don't think there's really anything in the state that we can do that can do anything other than respect a private land owner's right to do whatever they need to do for their property, to pay their taxes, to make ends meet, to feed their families. But if we have some competitive products, or if we can create incentives either through easements to access public land that's landlocked through their property, or if we can do arrangements of that nature, one of the things I have noted about a lot of outfitted ranches is it's not ever, it's just not now. So if you would be willing to work within their arrangement that says, okay, these are paying clients, they're paying good money, they need to have kind of first crack at the animals. But a lot of times that's confined to into a certain period and a certain number of hunters. So the landowner might come back and say, okay, we're blocked out for the first 2 weeks of the season, but if you come back, especially around Thanksgiving, they'll all be gone, they'll be done, and I'll let you come in here and shoot whatever you want.
And I've had that happen.
Yeah.
I mean, but like when you're out there, though, and, knock on the door, I don't wait till today, I'm out there in July.
Yeah.
And, trying to offer up defense, what have you, but most of the time it's just contracted out, but a lot of times shoulder season or maybe, middle of the season, like not the last week, but just prior to last week, you might be able to get on, but so many times it just, they can't because they're obligated with some other contract.
Sure. Yeah.
So just one more, I know I'm talking about, what about having like MOGA broach that conversation? Like, so it comes from the outfitter side or an organization that represents outfitters of, kind of meeting in the middle on something like that, where on these over objective units particularly, where they support youth hunting. Maybe they do, I'm just not aware of it.
They actually do. They have a pretty active element to that because, but I think there could be more done. And so I think a reach out, because there's a strong willingness by that organization to do more collaboration, less fighting, because it's getting the state farther and it's, I think, getting outfitters farther. They, for a while, and especially when I was an outfitter involved in that, it was all about just defending your rights to do business. You were getting attacked from all angles. And so what do? You come back out fighting. But I think they care as much about the resource and they're all Montana sportsmen too, right? They're sportsmen. And they just choose to make a living doing what all of us love to do. So I think if you reached out and said, let's form a collaboration and figure out ways where some of the clients of the outfitters would give access, I think you'd find a pretty warm reception to that. I really do. It's definitely worth trying. But it's that kind of innovation that I think is going to break through, because I don't think we're going to be able to change some of the tenets, which is we got to have our funding and can't avoid population growth. And these are things we can't move. So then what can we do?
Well, I think we're down to the last 2 minutes. Ian, do you want to bring us home here with your last comment?
Sure, I guess I ditto on a lot of that conversation that went on. I kind of put some time in on like an Access Plus idea on the elk advisory group to maybe try to tackle some of that. Not perfect, but tried to. I guess I just while I got Commissioner Tabor's ear, I just reiterate on the B tag side of things. I mean, yeah, anything that could be done for the to look at the private for those non-resident tags, the looking at anything that would specify those as potentially a private land only tag. But then also I was kind of bummed I didn't see anything come out of the legislative session on mandatory reporting, because I think they're like the data shows that it's okay, is non-resident pressure an issue all the way across the state? Absolutely not. Is it remotely an issue in Northwest Montana? No, not at all. But in other areas, I mean, it can be. I mean, it is pretty severe. I'm hearing from some of the folks, Elk Coalition and other stuff that they kind of approached that, and they were thinking that would be better done through the commission or through the department as far as like mandatory hunter reporting. Or I've heard before that needed to be a legislative thing.
So when you say mandatory reporting, is it just trying to get the harvest data 100% like waterfowl, you're saying? Okay.
Yeah,
like the
harvest
Alaska
data.
method in a lot of the other states. And I do think the director, there's some project work in that arena, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, when you
Emily, do you know if we're making any progress on that front as to whether we'll have kind of automated reporting in order to be able to apply for the next license, and similar to what many other states do, so we can get kind of real-time data on.
Commissioner Tabor, I know that we're still working on it. I think that's probably a discussion that the director and deputy need to have with the commission to see as far as authority and stuff goes, but we would like to have it too in licensing. So I'm an advocate as well.
Okay. So Ian, I'll continue to keep the process alive, because I think every single commissioner agrees with you that data seems vital. And it seems like it lends itself, especially because it's so common in other states. But I also know that it doesn't come for free. And so the retrofit and what would be required and able to do it from an IT perspective and the amount of dollars it would take, it's not any chump change deal. It would be expensive. So I think there's a desire to do it, but it also probably has to have a funding mechanism that would have to come from the legislature.
Yeah, because I think that, I mean, yeah, that could be pretty powerful in the, you know, if you just take care of, you know, you take the scalpel approach to non-resident hunting pressure and, you know, reduce it, you know, where it's maybe excessive, or, you know, that could even go to resident hunting pressure in areas, but try to spread it out. Montana's a big state. We can probably, you know, all still hunt each year, but just not in the same spot.
5 seconds.
Yeah.
A lot of
Sounds
states
good.
do require you to actually have a tag validated by a warden, a fireman, whoever, some public official. But it could be something, if we want to do it much, no, and I'm not saying that's a good plan. What I am saying is, if we wanted to do that, the quick fix would be to add that to the licensed sales computer. So when I go in to buy my 23 license and I go to buy a deer license, and they'll say, box right there, did you harvest a deer last year? Did you harvest an elk last year? Did you harvest an antelope, whatever? And you just click the box, literally, and that just feeds off to whatever database you want. Doesn't take any effort for anybody to do anything. And you'd get 98% accuracy probably. Yeah.
One problem with that though is that, you know, if you look at the 100 days and the 100 effort, it's lost. And that's what we get with the harvest surveys.
Right.
So we get that estimate. So just checking whether you got a deer and elk is easy. It's the effort that is really what.
Had to go into.
You can do those things.
Yeah, but could we do both?
As long as you can remember a year from now what you did last fall.
Our wife's good.
Can't remember.
Well, I think there's a good place to end on this conversation at 9 o'clock. So I know some folks got to drive home still, and so thanks everybody. That was a great discussion and really in depth in what we wanted this conversation to be about. So hopefully we touched on everything everybody wanted to talk about. The next meeting is June 7th at Lone Pine. That's going to be up at the Visitor Center. That's our season ender. So that's the fun barbecue. We're going to have, I think Vista Linda catering it. So that's a nice fancy dinner to kind of celebrate the end of the season. And then we take a break for summer. And then we'll get back going in the fall. So June 7th, but I'll follow up with an email after tonight. And
Stay tuned for legislative CAC. And we'll polish up the agenda for that final one.
Yeah.
Work with Molly and figure out what we want to end with for the year.
Field work, help needed, volunteer stuff, spring things.
So I think you missed I'm gonna send something out on the archery range help at Lone Pine.
May 26th.
The elk project is moving. You know, we're gonna be moving towards the capture stuff. And we're still trying to figure out what that's gonna look like as far as volunteers. And this may be that year where we see how that actually goes. Cause it's likely gonna need to be like a 3 or a 4 day commitment by somebody to actually come and help, where you're trained up on how to do it. You gotta get down there, lodging, everything going, and then they're long days, but we're still trying to finalize that detail. And we may be able to get some limited stuff out for this year, but that one, it might be a little more in depth than what we were thinking. But we have 69 elk up, none have died, and which is good. Yeah. Early on. that was right off the
That
bat.
doesn't count.
But recently. Anyway. Three mountain lions are still out there. Anyway. Yes.
That was
I'm not sure, I shared that around. Thanks, Emily. Well,
Everything. Everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Allison beats us. You know, they work very hard in the end.
But I-
Have fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and, you know, there's some magical moments.
That's gonna be the-
When we're watching, you're like, oh, the music. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I got my fingers into a lot of things.
That might.
Yeah. Yeah, well.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah,
They were, you know, that same parent.
I know.
You kind of swing fast and you go around into.
No, but we're just getting going. And I was on Flathead Lake yesterday looking for perch. Did you?
Really? I think they were trying to hold it down.
A lot of days.
No, it wasn't on that one. This is what I'm aware of.
I'm thinking that, well, last year, it didn't show up. And so I'm thinking that,
Yeah, but water temperature, you know, a lot of stuff.
they're all males.
Yeah, there was no milk.
Yeah.
No milk.
Yeah.
First time I went to it was nice. There's one guy that like super dry, surprisingly, just looking along, you know.